right, so went through a little Alfred Hitchcock marathon. I guess I just want to start with we can talk about him a little bit. I know he got started. He was created credits, opening credits for films.
Well, he actually created the titles for silent
Title, yeah,
films.
title cards, yeah.
I guess they called them the intertitles or the cards that would have, and he would do the decorations around the titles as well. Apparently, he had some experience as a commercial artist. He did advertising art for a cable company, like the big cables that they lay in roads.
Yeah.
He did that for a while, and I guess that was his entree into the British studios. I think he worked for a time for a German studio as well, but I think that might have come a little later. I think initially he started doing those titles for a British film company. The British film company at some point, I think, became an American film company. It was Famous Players Lasky was the name of the American company.
Yeah.
Because he talked about how essentially when he went to work, he was going to America because all the people he was working with were Americans and everything was done the American way. And he was a big film fan, theater and film, but especially film. And he said that he preferred the American films. Back then, almost everybody did because the British films, they had a system, quota system. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but the American film industry became so dominant at a certain point that certain countries had quotas. The British film company was protected by a quota. There had to be so many British-made films released every year. I guess this was the distributor's responsibility. They had to make sure that they produced a certain number of British films before they could release the American films.
Right.
But he was working for one of the British companies that was actually run by an American company. I think all the major studios eventually had British branches. So he worked his way up, according to his interview with Truffaut, and I guess that's something to mention. I don't know if you ever read this book.
No, I have not.
This was a pretty big deal in its day. Francois Truffaut, the French film director, one of the new wave French film directors, he was a big Hitchcock fan. And when he was working as a critic before he became a famous filmmaker, he was one of the French critics that championed Hitchcock and used the dreaded A word, the auteur word.
Yeah.
And he met Hitchcock around the time, I guess he was doing, wasn't Rear Window, I think it was a little later than that. Might have been Vertigo or somewhere in that period, sometime in the 60s, I guess. I think it was in 62, actually. So whatever film Hitchcock was doing around then. And he interviewed him for about 2 or 3 days, I guess. They recorded the interviews, and then he made a book out of it. He had the conversations transcribed, and he edited it, and he made a book out of it, which was a big bestseller. Towards the end of his life, he didn't live that old, to a very old age. I think Truffaut died when he was in his mid-50s. But one of the last things he did was an updated version of that book, which covered the films that Hitch hadn't made up to that point.
Right.
So it's interesting to hear the original tape recordings are available online, and I've listened to them all in the past, but I spent some time skipping around listening to bits and pieces of them today. And Hitchcock claims he never really saw himself as a director. He never imagined he'd be a director, but opportunities presented themselves, and because of his love of film, and I guess most importantly, because he actually had some theories. He actually had some ideas about how stories should be told, and that's evident really from some of the earliest silent films that he did. One of the early films that he did, one of the silent films, was called The Lodger, and it was it alluded to the Jack the Ripper murders. It's about a boarding house where they begin to suspect that one of the boarders is Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
And he used all sorts of very interesting techniques to build the suspense and to make it an interesting and exciting movie. The company that financed the thing, when the big shots looked at it, they said it's unreleasable. Terrible movie. They put it on the shelf for a couple of months, and after a while, they went back to it and they said, well, we spent money on this. I guess we have to release it in some form. They put it out, and it was acclaimed as the best British film ever made.
Right, yeah. Now, his first film was The Pleasure Garden. That
Yeah.
was his first silent film.
I've never seen it.
But I didn't watch it either. I didn't go back too far in the library.
I didn't even, for this viewing, for this show, I didn't even go back to The Lodger because there's so many other movies that, you can see the same ideas done, full scale, so to speak, because he was sort of constantly developing the ideas that he had throughout his career. You can see, for instance, with some of the movies he did in the 30s when he really first started to hit his stride with those British films like The 39 Steps and Man Who Knew Too Much and The Lady Vanishes. You can see things that he would be doing later in movies like North by Northwest. And,
yeah. I think I want to say the earliest one I watched may have been Murder.
Oh, you watched that far back?
Well, I went back. I think that was probably the earliest one I watched of his, but I didn't make it all the way through it. I found it kind of boring.
It was a silent movie?
No, it wasn't a silent movie. I just couldn't get into it. I don't know if I was burnt out on Hitchcock by that point.
Well, that's
or
possible.
If it was just I don't know. It didn't seem. I don't know. I just couldn't get into it.
Because I think one of the brilliant things about his career is that he recognized that he had a special skill, a special genius for a certain type of story. And he tried to stick to that. There were exceptions. There were little, instances where he went and tried different things, especially earlier in his career. But the best stuff he did usually fits into that genre. You could say in a sense that he invented some subgenres. There really weren't any horror movies like Psycho before that film was made. And there really weren't any horror movies or science fiction movies like The Birds before that movie was made. He always had a reputation as being a horror filmmaker, probably because of those two films.
Yeah, I would say because, Psycho and The Birds.
Right, but he really wasn't. Most of his films have no supernatural aspect to them, and they're not really loaded with a lot of gore or anything like that. Frenzy probably would be the only other film that really would fit into that category. And that's next to last film. But so many of his films are, so delightful, and the influence that he had, not just being responsible for those two subgenres of the slasher movie and the nature attacks movie, but you could argue that the whole James Bond series and all the imitations of the James Bond series are basically just an attempt to do Hitchcock.
Yeah.
Cary Grant was he was a friend of Cubby Broccoli's, the producer of the Bond films, and he was originally considered, and he just didn't want to do multiple films. I think he felt that he was too old when he did North by Northwest.
Yeah.
He was 55 when he did North by Northwest, and he was looking a little bit long in the tooth by that point. So the idea of doing a series of movies starting in 1962, when the Bond series started, that probably didn't appeal to him, and it probably wouldn't have worked. Although I think when you look at movies like Notorious, you could see how he would have made a fantastic James Bond.
Yeah.
And really, the Bond they ended up with, Sean Connery, was sort of modeled on Cary Grant in that movie. It's not so much modeled on the Cary Grant in North by Northwest, because that character is kind of, floundering.
Yeah, maybe a little bit of To Catch a Thief.
To Catch a Thief, yes. There's a lot of stuff in those films, in Notorious, To Catch a Thief, and North by Northwest, where just the shots alone, the way they're composed, remind me of scenes From Russia with Love and Dr. No and Goldfinger. So that influence was definitely very strong. And of course, in From Russia with Love, they even go so far as to actually duplicate the famous crop duster scene with the crop duster chasing Cary Grant in the fields. So it wasn't even something they were trying to hide. So he had a tremendous influence. And I guess you could also say that there's this whole genre of films that weren't made by Hitchcock, but which are sort of Hitchcockian thrillers. You know? Matter of fact, some of the, I think it was Cary Grant that did one, Charade. Was that Cary?
Yeah.
And that was definitely an attempt to capture a Hitchcockian feel. And there were a bunch of others. You know?
Yeah, well, I noticed whenever I was watching some of these on some of the streaming services, a lot of the recommendations were other films that weren't Hitchcock,
right.
but were in that same
influence
style
or inspire.
or vein. Yeah.
You could also say the Giallo movies, the Italian horror movies or slasher movies, they were descended from Marnie.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff in Marnie that even more so you would think, well, maybe they're imitating Psycho, but you look at the way they are shot and the use of color, and it's really more Marnie that they're going for.
Copying, yeah.
Marnie, I never particularly cared for as a Hitchcock film. It's got a lot of interesting stuff in it, but it seems to me that when he goes too far with the Freudian explanations, runs into trouble. You know, I mean, that's always one of the criticisms that people make about Psycho, is that after the film should be over,
yeah,
you have 5 minutes of Simon Oakland as a psychiatrist describing what was wrong with Norman Bates and why he did what he did, which I don't think is as terrible as some people feel.
No, I don't mind it. No, even though I said I would change that ending, I would have left that on there, obviously.
Yeah, well, he saves it at the very end by going back to Norman Bates, now completely in the mind of his mother. So doing that rather chilling thing of sort of staring at the camera and saying, "I won't even hurt a fly." You know, that's a nice way to send the audience out. But that movie was really shocking. I mean, we're jumping way ahead. We're jumping to this to one of his later successes.
Well, what was your first Hitchcock film you saw?
Geez, that's an interesting question. As a kid, I do remember the first time I saw Psycho on TV as a kid, and I remember being very impressed by it. But I probably had seen other Hitchcock movies before that, but I couldn't tell you which ones.
So you've probably seen them and just didn't know at the time they were Hitchcock, or you just can't remember?
Well, I knew who he was, but I probably knew who he was more from the TV show, which I watched all the time.
Yeah.
That was in constant syndication from the moment it went off the network. It seemed to be on constantly. I think it might have been on daily on some of the local stations here in New York.
Right. Yeah.
So I certainly was familiar with him, and he was kind of rare in that sense. At that time, there were directors that people knew. There were Hollywood directors that you knew their names, but there wasn't any Hollywood director who was such a fully formed character.
They had their own TV show. Yeah.
Had their own TV show. He had his own mystery magazine. He had a line of books that went on for quite a while and was quite successful. I have a couple. I didn't drag them down, but I would buy those as a kid, just because I was intrigued by the covers. But yeah, he and I always wondered, and this is something I never hear people speak about, the character that he developed for himself. I wonder where that came from. Who was he imitating? Was it his father? Was it his sort of parody of a British gentleman? Because he has that sort of formality.
Right, yeah.
You know, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, you know. And he has the black suit, almost makes him look like an undertaker. And when he stands, he always stands with his hands like this in front of him.
Right.
Possibly the only comfortable way for a man with a belly like that.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. A friend of mine, I was speaking about this with a friend of mine earlier, and he seemed to think that was a character that was developed for his introductions on the TV show. But it seems to me that almost from the first episode of the TV show, the writers of those introductions were writing to a pre-established character.
Yeah.
I mean, and the jokes wouldn't have worked if people didn't know what Hitchcock was supposed to be like. So it must have been something that he had been developing for a long time in interviews and things like that before the TV show came along. I always wondered why he would choose. I mean, obviously, he was not a physically attractive man, right?
Yeah.
But to choose to be such an eccentric figure. Shadow of a Doubt, which is one of the movies I watched for this episode, which I think is a terrific film. I was actually surprised in going back to it to see how good it was. But there's the character, I don't know if you caught it, but there's a character in that film, the father of the family that Joseph Cotton intrudes into.
Right.
The father is always spending time with a neighbor, talking about ways to kill people, great techniques for murders. Like that, I guess they're thinking of maybe being mystery writers or something like that.
Yeah.
But they're always exchanging stories about what the easiest way to kill somebody would be, or how to avoid detection, and that sort of thing. And to me, that guy is Hitchcock. Hitchcock is a sort of outwardly conservative and boring figure who's busy up here thinking about bumping people off and all sorts of macabre and morbid things. He always claimed that he was scared. The one thing he was scared of, and that was a question I was asked of him a lot, because he had this reputation of making scary movies, which really wasn't true. But up until Psycho, at least. But he would always answer by saying that the one thing that always scared him was the police. And not because he was guilty, it's just that he couldn't bear the suspense. He couldn't bear this, like when he was getting a ticket or something, he couldn't bear the suspense of waiting to see what was going to happen. Of course, a lot of the things that Hitchcock repeated over and over again in his interviews, you have to take with a grain of salt, because it may all be part of building that character. He also told the story about how, as a child, this might explain his fear of the police. His father sent him along to the police station with a note, and the note, the officer constable read the note and put him in prison and said, "This is what we do with bad little boys," and kept him in jail for 5 minutes and then let him go. And apparently that was such a scary, according to Hitchcock, that was such a scary event in his life that it gave him this mortal fear of police officers. And I guess you could also say it gave him the first inkling of what type of stories he'd like to tell.
Yeah.
So many of his movies are about the wrong man, right? The wrong guy being accused, over and over again. North by Northwest, 39 Steps. I Confess, The Wrong Man actually is a movie with that title. Almost every film he's done has at least one character who's being mistakenly accused of something.
Yeah, Dialing for Murder was another one.
Dialing for Murder, yeah. You can't get away from it in his movies. You can't get away from that any more than you can get away from fearsome portrayals of mothers.
Yeah.
North by Northwest is the only one where the mother isn't that much of a monster. But in many of his films, the mother figure is either a bizarre eccentric or somebody who's actually dangerous, like in Notorious.
Yeah.
And I love the way he introduces the mother character in Notorious by having that shot where she's seen at the top of the stairs and she comes all the way down the stairs and comes right up at a close up of the camera.
Yeah.
She's sort of staring at it. I mean, it's an introduction that's worthy of Dracula, But Notorious is one of my favorites. I don't know how you feel about it, but I've always felt that that's Hitchcock at his smartest, his most sophisticated, and his most understated.
Yeah, that's a good one. I guess my thing. I guess I'm a bigger fan of his later films, which is because this is the very first Hitchcock film that I ever saw was Rear Window. I saw it before The Birds or before Psycho, so this right here is like my favorite, and that's, to me, whenever you say Hitchcock, I think Rear Window.
Well,
I don't think of Psycho or The Birds. To me, that's like the perfect movie, and that's because I saw it. That's the first one I saw when I was a kid when I saw it. So.
Yeah, I agree. That's right up near the top of my list too. Sometimes it's hard to determine which one you think is best, and that's why these polls that they do of critics always seem kind of silly to me, because they say that Vertigo is the best film of all time. It displaced Citizen Kane. It's the greatest movie ever made. Well, I like Vertigo. There's a lot of interesting things. It's something that you can talk about endlessly, but I don't think it's the best movie ever made, and I don't even think it's the best Hitchcock film. So I think the problem with those polls is that, if I understand correctly, they poll like 100 or 200 critics, and apparently the numbers varied over time.
Right.
Now it's somewhere around 150, 200, something like that. And they don't take the number one from each list, because that wouldn't be workable. What they do is they look to see how many times certain films appear on
the list, yeah.
Anywhere on the list, right? So a lot of those critics, you could probably ask those 200 critics, do you think Vertigo is the best film ever made? And they would probably say, no, I had that at number 10 or 12 or 20 or 50. But because it's on everybody's list, it ends up being the number one film. I think there's a lot of problems with Vertigo, and I didn't used to like it. When I was younger in the 80s, a bunch of films that Hitchcock had done that he sort of had partial or complete ownership of, he took them out of release.
Right.
And when in the 80s, I guess he had passed away by that point.
I think he died in 1980. Yeah.
He died in 1980. So this would have been after his death. They really re-released all of these films almost as if they were new releases, and they put them out as a big package. So you could go to your the local theater every week or every month, however long the series went on, and they released Rear Window, they released Rope, they re-released Trouble with Harry, the remake of Man Who Knew Too Much, and I guess that's it. Was there another one from that period? Oh, and Dial M for Murder.
Yeah.
And apparently those were all movies that Hitchcock, for some reason or another, ended up with ownership of. And the first one I went to see was Rear Window, and it was with a packed audience. And it went over like gangbusters. Everybody thought it was fantastic.
Yeah.
And so everybody came back for the other Hitchcock.
For the other ones, yeah.
And the other ones were not so good. I mean, I have an appreciation for Rope. I think that's an interesting experiment. I think it's quite effective as a presentation of a stage drama.
Yeah.
Might be the best movie ever made from just a recording, so to speak, of a stage drama.
Yeah. No, I guess everybody says, oh, it was done in one shot.
Not really true.
And I'm like, not really, because they were shooting on film. And you can't do that much.
Well, besides the thing that he explained was that they came up with this technique. They had 10-minute rolls of film, so they could shoot for 10 minutes continuously. And then he would have the camera move, right. Somebody was standing in front of it, and that would, they would stop, they would reload the camera, and then they would continue. But actually, there are actual cuts in the movie that nobody ever talks about. Why that isn't more widely discussed, I don't know. I don't know if I assume Hitchcock did that purposely.
Yeah,
must have said there was some.
But I mean, that wasn't the selling point when it came out, was it? Like, oh, we filmed this in one shot, or was that just something people talk about afterwards?
No, I think it might. I mean, I haven't seen any of the advertising from it, but I have a feeling it must have been discussed in the press, because why go through all that trouble if you're not going to let people know that you did it all in one shot?
Right.
I mean, they even went to the trouble of building that big cyclorama of the city behind it, and they had a whole system of dimmers that were going to turn the lights down as they got onto dusk, and they had clouds made out of cotton or something that would be pulled across, to simulate clouds moving across the sky. So they went through a lot of trouble to give it a feeling of something that was actually happening in the moment.
Yeah.
And I think they succeeded. It actually is quite quite engrossing as a result of that. You keep waiting because of the nature of the story. See, this is something that Hitchcock also said about Dial M for Murder. Truffaut asked him why he didn't open that up, which is what they would usually do when they would acquire a play. If it was a successful play, they would say, okay, well, we got the germ of the story, and now we'll open it up. We'll do scenes outside and hanging from the bridge, or going underwater, or wherever they had to go.
Right.
And it usually, according to Hitchcock, and I agree with him, it takes the air out of the thing.
Oh yeah.
It needs the stage piece works on stage, and if you take it out of that environment, if you try to do it on the streets or in exotic locations, then you might just as well not do it, because all the problems that they've solved in creating that successful play you're throwing away all the solutions that they're giving
Yeah,
you.
yeah. Rope, Dying for Murder, Rear Window, one location. That's like it. You're because you're there. You're not. You know what I'm saying? You're in that room with Jimmy Stewart with his broken leg, just with him the whole time. It makes
Right.
you know you're more. You're not. You know they're not traveling around anywhere else. I think it's. I think that's more effective to the one location shots of
Yeah.
films like that.
And a skill, the storytelling skill, to be able to tell something that is so simple and make it and still make it so cinematic. You know, it's never, not for an instant is it boring. You're
No, no.
completely caught up in it. And the humor, the script is delightful. That's another thing I would say. Hitchcock's best films are the films where he had great source material.
Yeah.
You know, in that case, in Rear Window, they had a Cornell Woolrich.
It was a short story.
Right.
Short story from was it a paper or?
It was probably published in a pulp magazine or something like that,
Yeah,
or it
yeah.
might have been a paperback original. It is now.
Yeah.
It's in a collection of Cornell Woolrich stories, but the basic concept was in that story, and then he took it and
And went with it. Yeah.
did something completely.
But just like I mean, just like whenever we were talking about Rosemary's Baby, his apartment, I'm like, I want to live in that apartment. And you know, that's like a great little bachelor apartment.
Yeah, and it's a nice thing to look out on, to be able to see all those different stories happening
Yeah.
all
I mean,
around you.
him and uh Grace Kelly, they were just
Oh,
perfect
yeah.
in it.
Grace Kelly, I have to say, in Rear Window and in To Catch a Thief, was there ever a more extraordinarily beautiful woman?
Yeah, I know.
It's just absolutely dazzling, and there's nothing artificial about her. You know,
No.
she, even with all the makeup and the jewelry and the costuming, she seems like you know, a real human being.
Yeah. No, when I watched it again today, whenever the opening scene where they're showing you all the people in the yeah, that's what the opening credits are, just you know, showing everybody.
Right.
For some reason, I kept thinking these characters feel like they should be like in a Disney cartoon because they're all you know like the one the torso, you know, she's the dancer. She's just dancing the whole time, no matter what she's doing, she's dancing. Then you got the musician who's always at the piano. And I was like, that's you know the way those characters, so they felt like cartoon characters, but they all felt real. I mean,
Yeah.
his the one that plays his nurse that comes in. I mean, she was just
Thelma Ritter.
yeah,
Yeah.
she's just great.
Some of her dialogue is just brilliant. Yeah. And even when I saw it in the 80s, which is some time removed from when the movie
Yeah.
was made, the audience was still roaring with laughter at some of her remarks.
Yeah, none of I mean none of it feels it doesn't feel, you know, I guess, you know, like well, not like I don't want to say campy, but
No,
it doesn't
no.
feel like a joke or, you know, it's real. It just feels like real people.
Well, all of Hitchcock's films, the best ones, but really all of them, because there was always a consistent level of quality, even in the lesser films. The thing I would say about it is there was a period in Hollywood when they really learned how to make certain type of entertainment. You know,
Yeah.
they knew how to make movies a certain way. They had developed a real technique that was, you know, finely honed. And Hitchcock was the best practitioner of that.
Oh yeah.
And he only started to lose his way when the approach to filmmaking started to change.
To change, yeah.
And interestingly, it was people like Francois Truffaut who was in the forefront of moving away from the Hitchcockian style of filmmaking. The French filmmakers and the Italian filmmakers were going for a more realistic feel. And that was a big problem, I think, with Hitchcock, with films like Topaz and Torn Curtain. You know, these are films that are made well into that time when everybody else is making things more realistically.
Yeah.
And he's making movies that still look like movies that might have been done in the mid 50s. The color and the lighting and everything is just not, you know, not the way movies were being made at that time. So with Frenzy, there was the big change. Somebody must have finally convinced him that Hitch, we can't shoot these movies this way.
Yeah.
It's not the way they're being done. I would say even Vertigo is, you know, it's a beautiful looking film.
Oh yeah. That's what was his who was his cinematographer? That was like his best work. Robert Burks, was that his name?
I guess so.
Yeah, to me that was like the cinematographer. He was like that was his best film right there.
Well, those films, Rear Window, To Catch a Thief, Vertigo, North by Northwest, I guess you could also include Dial M for Murder and Rope and Trouble with Harry.
Yeah.
Those were all those color films that he made in that middle part of his career, and they all have a similar look to them in terms of the cinematography. But Vertigo is especially interesting because he's using color to try to get across some ideas about the story. He's using it as part of the storytelling. Rear Window looks terrific. And
that's like that's my favorite movie.
Well, I think the advantage he has there is that all he needs to do is to convince you you're in that room.
Yeah.
Looking out over those other apartments. He's not trying to use the cinematography or the color to help him tell the story, because the story is pretty straightforward, right? You could say in a way that Jimmy Stewart's character in that movie is sort of a surrogate for Hitchcock himself. He may see himself as being kind of handicapped in a way. He's not in a wheelchair, but he might just well be. Towards the end of his life, he was in a wheelchair because he's so obese. And here he is sitting there with his camera looking through at all the other beautiful people. And so I guess it asks all sorts of questions about whether or not, what's the line that Grace Kelly uses? Is it okay to be a peeping Tom even if you prove that your neighbor isn't a murderer?
Yeah.
I guess that's raising those sort of questions about to what extent is it ethical to be peeking into other people's lives?
Yeah.
Even if you're having a positive effect.
Right. Well, watching it today again, I was just thinking it's a complete metaphor for what's going on now with like social media. Everybody's like looking into everybody else's life, and you've got these armchair sleuths who are solving murders based on people's Facebook posts. I was just like, that's kind of weird.
Well, that's an interesting observation. I don't think I've heard anybody make that case, but that's true. It does.
I know voyeurism was a big, that's always been a thing, and that's what it's based on. But that's just what I thought of today.
Yeah. Well, the other interesting thing about Rear Window is that Jimmy Stewart is hard for Grace Kelly to win over.
Yeah.
I don't know if there are many warm-blooded American males that would be able to resist her charms, and yet he seems to be quite resistant to her. So I know that I seem to remember hearing that Hitchcock had confided to somebody, might have even said it in an interview, that he was essentially impotent, and that after he had, he married Alma, who was somebody he had worked with. She was his continuity person or script girl, but really his consultant. She was his partner in most of the projects. After he married her, and she had a baby who actually grew up to appear in some of Hitchcock's films. After that, he wasn't interested in sex. He didn't have any sex. Now, I don't know why he would want that to be known, except possibly as a defense. It was all part of building this character of being somebody who wasn't interested in that sort of thing. He was more interested in stuff like, murder techniques and what gruesome displays they have at Madame Tussauds. One of the interviews I saw, it starts actually with him as a figure in Madame Tussauds. So that he always seemed to be cultivating that thing as sort of a sexless person who could stand outside all this crazy shit that's going on that usually has sex as a motivating thing, and he could almost look at it in a sort of with a sort of distance that a professor or a doctor or a scientist.
Right. Yeah.
But we are aware of some unfortunate business that happened with Tippi Hedren later in his career.
Yeah. I want to say I watched a biography that was that starred Anthony Hopkins as Hitchcock, but I couldn't remember. And I think it tackled some of that.
I saw that.
Because there were two of them that came out at the same time. There was the one with Anthony Hopkins, there was another one.
There was one called The Girl, which focuses specifically on Tippi Hedren.
Yeah.
Tippi Hedren, I have no doubt that she was mistreated by him. But even she says she thinks he's a genius, and she's perfectly willing to celebrate the work they did together because she thinks it's her unpleasant experience, if I'm not misstating her views,
Right.
was not sufficient cause to sort of cancel him and forget about the work he did. The work is too good. And also, you have to wonder what was going on in his mind.
Yeah.
Okay? Why would a person who claims to be impotent, why would he be chasing around after this woman? I have a feeling that what part of it might be is that he might have been impotent or effectively impotent, and his sexual desire was sort of channeled instead into controlling people, controlling particularly beautiful people. The idea to him, the great satisfaction of his life, was to have people like Cary Grant as his stand-in for him.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Or to be able to have people like Tippi Hedren or Grace Kelly or what's her name from Kim Novak.
Oh yeah, yeah.
These unbelievably attractive women, and to basically be able, just like Jimmy Stewart does in Vertigo, to be able to dress them the way he wants and make them up the way he wants. And I don't like your hair that way, do it this way. And with Tippi Hedren, she was actually under contract to him. So he felt, she's mine. It's like like a little toy I can play with. So I can see that. I know from my experience working in films that the one thing that everybody volunteers to help you with is the casting.
Yeah.
And I think it's because everybody sort of gets off on the idea of having all these young, attractive people presenting themselves to you for your approval. You know, it gives you a sense of power, you know, but you shouldn't, you know, you can smell the flowers, but you shouldn't do anything more. That was his mistake. And I got to admit, I don't know what in the world got into him, because particularly at that point in his life, he was not exactly in a position to be, you know, making love to a beautiful young woman like Tippi Hedren.
Tippi Hedren, yeah.
So I can't figure it out. But the fact that he makes characters like Jimmy Stewart seem so not impotent, but not vigorous men, macho men.
Yeah, I took him as he's just a cool character, right? He's just that, you know, the guy you want to be. You know what I'm saying? Oh, you don't want to be here right now? I don't need you. Get out of here now. Whatever. I'm gonna go back to spying on Miss Torso. You know.
But it is. I mean, the only reason we don't see that character as sort of contemptible is because it's Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah.
If you sat around in your bathrobe all day long, looking out the mirror, looking through your binoculars at the neighbors, I mean, people would think you're a creep.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's Jimmy Stewart, so. But the fact that he's in a wheelchair means that he's kind of impotent in a way. He's not able to defend himself when the time comes. He has to send his girlfriend out to do
the dirty work. Yeah.
Not that she's reluctant. She seems to be delighted to do it. But Hitchcock seems to be making these characters who in other movies would be sort of iconic male figures. He tries to make them a little more vulnerable, weaker.
I think that was part of the character too. Was, you know, they were mentioning before how he wants to continue. Like, once he gets out of the wheelchair, he wants to go back out in the field and do all this stuff, and she wants to stay there in the city. And then I think later on, once he realizes that she's really into this, you know, running across to the apartment, sneaking in, I think he kind of that's when he like started really to fall in love with her.
Well,
and realize, okay, this is the girl that I want. You know, she's not boring like I thought she was.
Well, she's certainly better looking than Thelma Ritter. So if you end up now, you got two broken legs.
Yeah,
she's a better nurse than and you could certainly tell from looking at the scene where Thelma Ritter gives him a rub down. You can certainly see that bodybuilding was not in vogue at that time. But Jimmy Stewart was an amusing fellow. I'm always surprised by how the character, the persona that he has, not just in Rear Window, but also in Vertigo, seems to be an older man than what he actually was.
Yeah.
I mean, he was about 55 or so, pretty much the same age as Cary Grant was when he did North by Northwest. And yet that sort of strange persona, I guess I could be asking the same question about Jimmy Stewart that I asked about Alfred Hitchcock. Where did he get that character from?
Yeah.
you know, that sort of stammering character that isn't recognizable, as far as I know, as any dialect that you would find in the United States. He doesn't. It's not like doing a Southern drawl or anything like that. It's a unique to him, which was true of Cary Grant as well. I mean, what the hell sort of dialect did Cary Grant have?
Yeah.
But in Vertigo especially, he seems to be playing kind of an old man, which is interesting. And the funny thing was that when Vertigo was a disappointment at the box office, Hitchcock probably unfairly blamed Jimmy Stewart. He said he was too old for the part, it didn't bring in the ladies, you know, which, you know, I mean, he hired the guy, so he knew how old he was, so why should that be a surprise? I think the reason why Vertigo is not successful at the box office is because it isn't as lightly entertaining as Hitchcock's other films.
It's definitely, we talked before about driving scenes. It definitely has a lot of those, just people driving. And
Yes.
I mean, it works. I mean, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed Vertigo. And the scenes of him just following Kim Novak. I mean, they're just, it's in that music. That music's great.
Great score.
Vertigo. Yeah, it's a great score, so that kind of helps it out. But yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of, I guess, you know, I don't want to say action, but you know, there's a lot of long, drawn out scenes of him following her or just standing there looking at her. And
well, also in all the other movies, and I think Hitchcock always made a point of this, the main character has some purpose.
Yeah.
Something he has to do urgently. Find something or get, you know, prove that he's not the guilty party or whatever. And in Vertigo, it was hard for audiences to really understand what Jimmy Stewart was up to.
Yeah, I think it was probably a little bit too weird for that time.
And for a long time, I sort of disliked the film because it seemed to me that the plot was just ridiculous. I mean, the whole idea of a wealthy man who wants to murder his wife concocting such a cockamamie scheme, you know, especially, I mean, if you're a murderer and you want to set it up so somebody witnesses your wife's suicide.
Yeah.
Would you go to a police officer?
Right.
Not smart. And there's all sorts of things like that just don't really make sense. Hitchcock was always against what he called the plausibles, the people in the audience that were always talking about, oh, it's not plausible.
Yeah.
His idea is that plausibility is dull. But in this movie, he goes way beyond what
Yeah, when you have her almost playing the two different characters, and then at some point Jimmy Stewart wants her to dress up like the other one. It's just like
it's I mean, on the one hand you could say, well, yes, obsessed people behave that way. That's an accurate but you just as a regular person, you say, first of all, has it come to pass that he bumps into this woman? In those scenes where he's sort of wandering around, what is he looking for? The woman is dead. He knows that. Does he actually expect to be able to bump into her?
To find her.
And the idea that somebody who has participated in a crime like that, which he has, would still have a little, memento, piece of jewelry from the wife that was killed, that doesn't seem very likely to me. So there are all sorts of things that just make the plot seem ridiculous. But I think that was intentional. I think Hitchcock was saying, I want to make a story which is dreamlike, where the rules don't apply.
Oh, yeah.
It's not logical, but I'm going to use what he called pure cinema techniques to catch you up in this story and to catch you up in the emotional aspects of the story.
Yeah.
More so than just the plot, and he was successful in that, I think.
Oh yeah, visually the movie's great. I mean, the locations that he used, that house that she lived in, and then of course, filming at the bridge and the redwood forest and all that. It's just beautiful shots.
If he was going for pure cinema, then he achieved it in that film, I think. But the funny thing was that the great success that he had with Psycho is also attributable, I think, to taking a story which is probably not airtight, but using the camera and cutting to convince the audience that it's happening, to sweep the audience up in the emotion of it just through cinematic techniques.
Oh yeah.
And that is, I think Psycho is more effective in capturing the audience's emotions, getting them wrapped up in what's happening in the immediacy of it, than Vertigo. Vertigo, I think probably a lot of folks in the audience would say, man, this doesn't make any, this is too fucking weird. You know?
Yeah.
and there are missteps, like, well, it's another thing that he invented actually was that vertigo effect. I think we've talked about this before.
Yeah.
So that's something that's been used in other films since. But some of the things that aren't so effective are like that dream sequence that Jimmy Stewart has, where he sees what an animated, almost looks like Walt Disney animated, the corsage or whatever that the woman's. So the petals flying and then his face zooming towards
his hair blowing up and the red background with the.
Right. It's a little too. It's the same problem, I think. And I didn't watch Spellbound for this episode. I've seen it in the past. I seem to remember that it has like a dream sequence that was done by Salvador Dali, designed by Salvador Dali, and it was the same problem. We don't buy that as a dream. Yeah, we've spoken during our Exorcist episode about the effectiveness of Friedkin's dream sequence in The Exorcist with the mother coming out of the subway. That felt like a real dream.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know about you, but I don't dream with, spirals.
No.
And Jimmy Stewart's head reminded me of the commercial. I don't know if you had Carvel ice cream stores, and they used to have a commercial for Cookie Puss, which was a cake, and they had to put a face on it. And they used to have that hurtling towards you in the commercials. So Jimmy Stewart always brings Cookie Puss to mind.
Yeah. I always found that, just watching all the ones I watched today, his more, like we talk about Rear Window, like, the one location, smaller sets, more intimate films. To me, those are his best. That's his best work.
Yeah,
for some reason, I don't know why, but.
Well, I would even say I've always liked Dial M for Murder, even though that obviously is not one of his most acclaimed films.
Yeah, I like it too.
But it's got such a great play. It's such a terrific story, and Ray Milland is very entertaining. Grace Kelly is great in it, and John Williams, the British actor, not the composer. He's quite entertaining. When I was watching it this time, I thought a lot of what we see in movies like Rope and Dial M for Murder must have been elements that Levinson and Link had in mind when they devised Columbo.
Yeah.
Because the same thing. We see the murder, right? We see the murderer preparing the murder, and then we see the murder. In the case of Dial M for Murder, of course, the murder doesn't come off. Oh, actually, somebody does end up.
Somebody does, yeah.
But then there's the inspector that comes in, and it's basically a match. In the case of Rope, the inspector is Jimmy Stewart. I guess he's supposed to be their professor from their college days. But it's the same sort of thing with sort of an eccentric figure who comes in and is sort of tripping people up on their lies.
Yeah.
It's very much like a Columbo template there.
Yeah, but with Dial M for Murder, you had, it was like, it's that one room basically through the whole, to the whole thing. And it's all, these tight shots of everybody. But whenever the husband is talking to the guy he's going to have kill his wife, they do that where the camera's almost up at an angle, looking down at him. It's almost like you're looking at the floor plan of like, what should be laid out. I was like, that's a pretty interesting way to do that.
Right. Yeah. That he always managed to work in some clever shots, even in the most, bland material. But I don't think that play is bland at all. I think that's a perfect example of that type of mystery thriller. They don't make them like that anymore. When Anthony Shaffer, who would later do the screenplay for Frenzy, when he wrote Sleuth, which was a tremendous success on stage and in the movies, he probably was thinking of some of the stuff that he saw in Hitchcock's movies. That he probably had. I think Hitchcock had a tremendous influence on almost everybody who worked in that field. But that type of story, the Dial M for Murder play, that used to be a fairly common thing. There used to be plays like that on Broadway or on the London stage all the time. Every season there was one or two really good thrillers.
Yeah.
We haven't had that for decades, right? Probably not since Death Trap, which is the 70s or the early 80s, which was written by Rosemary's Baby's guy.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Ivor Levin, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm going to guess that Ivor Levin was probably a big Hitchcock fan.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, Dial M for Murder always entertains me, and I think it's not a masterpiece of cinema, but it's a very solid piece of entertainment, and it makes a good companion piece with Rope, because they do have those similarities, and with Rear Window as well.
Yeah.
But it is funny that so many of his films do take, for a guy that was all about cinema, you know, the importance of composition and cutting and camera movement. So some of his best movies are on a very small scale.
Small scale, yeah. Now another thing too was like Rear Window, the fact that was a set, that whole thing was built.
Yeah.
And the way they built it was like all the apartments were built them down in like a hole inside the studio, and then so that way his apartment's up here and they can look down on it. And the fact that they went to the detail and put like the little alley in the back with the storefront, that little storefront there, I'm like, that's just great.
Yeah,
that's like, you're not going to do that anymore.
Right. Now, the funny thing is, it probably wouldn't be as effective if they actually did it in a real
location. Yeah.
The ability to control all those elements all at once and have a sort of uniform stylization. There's no jarring elements. Everything feels like it belongs in that world.
Yeah.
You know. So yeah, Rear Window probably comes about as close to a perfect movie as far as I'm concerned.
Because your TV or your theater screen is the rear window. You're basically just looking at what he's looking at. Like I said, I think it's great. That's one of my I think it's one of his best ones.
He found a way to actually put the audience in the place of the lead character all through the movie.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know if I know Raymond Burr did a lot of movies over the years before he did Perry Mason, but he certainly makes a very impressive.
I was wondering that if he was like big at the time and had you know what I'm saying, or if that was like his first big role. I didn't know if it was one of those like, oh, he can't be the killer, it's Raymond Burr, you know what I'm saying? And wait, he is. I didn't know if that was like a big twist back then or.
Well, Hitchcock mentioned in regard to one of his films that the problem he had sometimes was that the big actors, the best actors, wouldn't consider characters who appear after the titles. In other words, they didn't want to play the secondary roles. They were So, but the truth is that those smaller roles sometimes are harder to play and require greater skill than the lead characters, right? And he's quite good in that, even though for most of the movie, we only see him in a great distance.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, we have our Tingler friend, Miss Lonely Hearts.
Lonely Hearts, yeah.
The actress who plays Miss Lonely Hearts played the deaf mute in The Tingler, the William Castle movie that we talked about a few episodes ago. So that's kind of amusing. But I have to admit that one scene in Rear Window, when the woman discovers that her dog has been killed, shouting to the whole neighborhood, that always brings a lump to my throat. Because I didn't think you'd kill a little dog. Kind of hard not to respond emotionally to that.
Yeah.
But it's a very entertaining movie. Very entertaining.
There was like a little joke that I just saw today and didn't realize it, and that's like you have like the newlywed couple that come in, and he sees them come in. The landlord brings them in, and of course he carries her across and there's like a couple, maybe a couple scenes later. It's like maybe a day or two later in the movie. The groom opens the window. It's like leans out looking, and you hear her say something. And he kind of like sighs. She's just like wearing him out with sex the whole time.
Right. And then they're the only ones really at the end of the film that don't have a happy end.
Yeah.
After the sex is over, it's not as much fun. And Mrs. What do they call her? Miss Body?
Miss Torso.
Miss Torso. The boyfriend that she's waiting for is some little guy that looks like a little chenille.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of little fun things like that. The woman who is doing the abstract art, what does she say? It's like a body with a hole in the center.
Yeah.
And she says it's hunger. Is that what she's?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. She's an interesting figure. But they're all kind of fun. It's a delightful movie. The audience that I saw it with, just it's one of those movies that they would, you walk out, you feel like you've been lifted off the ground. You know.
Yeah, I guess the only thing that didn't age well is they're worried about the woman being murdered, but they're not too worried about the lady being date raped. It's like, we'll just let that go.
Well,
we don't want to be involved in that.
I think that moment when Thelma Ritter realizes that she's getting ready to kill herself, and it's almost like they're watching two TV shows at once.
Yeah.
Oh my God, she's going to kill herself. Get on the phone, call the cops. And at the same time, Raymond Burr is descending on Grace Kelly.
Yeah.
So that is, everything just comes together at once. It's perfectly timed, beautifully done. But yeah, so that's a favorite, no question about it. Strangers on a Train is another one that I watched recently. That's a favorite of mine as well.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these stories that Hitchcock did that involve people wrongly accused, they could be very tedious if they weren't handled properly.
Yeah.
It's true also the 39 Steps, which may have been one of the first where he did that, where the basic premise is almost the same as North by Northwest, where the guy knows something about spy activity and they're trying to kill him or they're killing people around him, and he's always being accused for the dead bodies that are left behind. And in 39 Steps, it starts with that, with the woman who's trying to get some important information to her boss,
right?
And she gets stabbed. There's a little bit of an inconsistency there. She's in his apartment,
yeah,
and they know that there are two people. She knows that there's two people waiting outside to kill her, but they don't come in. They don't make any attempt to come in. And then Robert Donat, the hero, goes to bed, and when he wakes up, she comes staggering into the room with a knife in her back. Now, why, if they were in the apartment to kill her, why wouldn't they kill him as well?
Him, yeah.
That doesn't strike, because he doesn't linger on any of these things long enough for it to matter. But those are little lapses or inconsistencies.
Yeah, that was watching that this time was the first time I'd ever seen it. I'd never seen it before, and I watched it and I thought it was great.
It was very.
It was like a really great, like, simple story. And you'd already mentioned the Robert. What did you say, Donat?
Robert Donat, yeah.
Great actor. I don't know why. I don't know why I'd never seen him in anything else before. He was like superb in this movie.
Well, he had quite a career.
Yeah.
I don't know if he did many more movies like this one, but he was ideal for this type of role. He sort of set the model or the template for all the similar heroes.
Yeah, the young, attractive, funny leading man, right?
Always dealing with everything with a quip. Similar character in The Lady Vanishes, and of course, ultimately, Cary Grant in North by Northwest, very similar. Matter of fact, a lot of scenes in North by Northwest are very similar to 39 Steps. The scene in 39 Steps where he goes to the guy's place thinking that that's the guy he should be reporting to, and he's the guy with the missing pinky finger, the guy he should be staying away from. And the guy is having some sort of social event there, and his wife is there, or his mother, I forget which it is. And he sort of has the same sort of interaction with him in that scene that Cary Grant has with James Mason in North by Northwest. James Mason, incidentally, once again, proving his great value. I don't know how many lines he has in the movie, but every line is delivered to perfection,
Now, with 39 Steps, I thought it was like the way he shows up at this farmhouse. It feels like this. Feels like that joke,
It was actually.
You could stay at my house, but don't sleep with my daughter. And the guy's wife is just throwing herself all over this guy like he's like the most sexiest thing ever. I was like, that's like great. I never would expect to see something like that in one of these movies.
I think Hitchcock thought of it as like episodes.
Yeah.
And he did actually base that episode on that joke. I don't know. There's a lot of jokes about the farmer's wife or the farmer's daughter. But he did, the punchline of the joke has changed slightly, but it's basically the same premise. And Hitchcock actually recounted that joke in his Truffaut interview.
Yeah.
So he did that. You could say in a way that all the stories that he's telling in his films, including something like Psycho, are kind of like jokes. They're structured
Yeah.
like jokes. There's the setup, and there's a lot of sort of shaggy dog stuff in the middle, and then there's the punchline. And the longer he strings it out, the more enjoyable he makes it, and the more suspense he creates, the more entertaining the punchline is.
Yeah.
He said Psycho was a comedy. I don't know if he meant that literally,
Right.
but it does have a lot of humor in it, a sort of dark humor. And that's true of all of his films. I mean, even in something like Frenzy, which I think actually is probably the most mean-spirited of his films, probably because of the script that was written by Anthony Shaffer, because Anthony Shaffer was kind of a crappy guy, what I read. But there's a lot of humor in that probably wouldn't fly nowadays, like joking about rape and stuff like that.
Yeah. Now going back to 39 Steps, I don't know if this bothered me or if I thought it was really good whenever he bumps into the woman on the train and she's there for like 2 minutes. And then she comes back like 20 minutes later as like one of the main characters and finishes out the film. I was like, I wasn't expecting it. I just kept thinking it doesn't make sense, but I still enjoyed it. Like, cause she was great too. That actress was great. And they were great. They were great together. The scene where they're like handcuffed together or tied up together. The whole just great stuff. But I just couldn't figure out why that character all of a sudden came back.
Well, that's another element that shows up in North by Northwest, right? Ending up on the train and snuggling up to some blonde and saying, "Please protect me, I'm innocent. Don't get me away to the cops." I think the twist that he was working on with that was that she might have been an actress that the audience knew.
Yeah.
And when he comes into her car and says, "They're after me, but I'm innocent, please protect me," and he gives her a big kiss to fool them, the audience is going to think, "Oh, that kiss is going to be so great. She's going to throw in with him and protect him." And she doesn't.
She immediately turns him in. Yeah.
This is the guy you're looking for. So I guess the double twist is that she was heading in the same direction. She ends up in the same story, later part of the story. So that's kind of fun. But also the idea is, just like with the Bond films, they're constantly reminding you that you shouldn't be taking this too seriously.
Yeah.
Because they're not, and I guess that's what makes it more entertaining than tedious, because it could be tedious. I mean, these type of stories could be kind of a drag to watch if they were actually obsessing, for instance, about the MacGuffin.
Right. I guess that was just, she was just gone. And then later on, like, oh, she shows up and you're like, well, wait a minute. That was the one. Like, how'd she end up here? You know what I'm saying? Like, if she would have been tied into the story a little bit more, I would have believed it. But I mean, I still find I still find it entertaining.
Well, coincidences like that are acceptable as long as they aren't pivotal to the story. In other words, she doesn't provide him with an instant solution or resolution to his problem. Matter of fact, she doesn't provide him with a solution to anything. She accompanies him. Her moment of the important moment for her character is when she goes from being a non-believer to a believer.
Right.
When she overhears that conversation. Those are the little things that in the scripts that I write, I'm always looking for that sort of thing where we feel like we understand what direction things are going in, and then something happens that spins the thing in a different direction. Putting the story on the track that the audience wants it to be on without having to do too much contrived shit, that makes the audience feel like you're cheating. We want her to believe him.
Yeah, I do feel like if they were to redo that type of story nowadays, it would end up she would have been involved the entire time. We just didn't know it. You know what I'm saying? That's how they would have done it.
Well, possibly so. I know they did a remake. I think actually was it Hammer Films that did one of their last films. I think it was either The Lady Vanishes or The 39 Steps. They remade it. Unwise to do.
Well, I know The Lady Vanishes was remade because I think I found two other versions when I was looking for.
Oh, really? Two? Oh,
my God. One that I was going to watch.
Well,
one was 79, and I can't remember the other one.
Well, if it was 79, I guess Hammer. Yeah, probably that would have been the Hammer one. I think that was the last gasp of Hammer Films. They tried doing a Hitchcock remake, and it didn't work. Robert Powell, I think, was the star. He's the guy that played Jesus in Jesus of Nazareth,
right?
If I'm not mistaken. But anyway, Lady Vanishes, very entertaining. and they're all sort of a piece, right? 39 Steps and The Man Who Knew Too Much and The Lady Vanishes. You can immediately recognize that they're all from the same hand.
Oh yeah.
And they, in a way, they sort of set the style for that type of movie, and even to this day, I suppose, we're still seeing examples of that type of story.
Yeah, The Lady Vanishes, that was another one I'd never seen before. Watched it around on this time and loved it.
Yeah, it's very
Thought it was great. Immediately fell in love with Margaret Lockwood.
Yeah, she's very great. Charming. Yeah.
And then like when they're in the hotel, like her and those other two women, I was like, well, if it's just them three the whole movie, I'm fine.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
She was like a really good. I don't think we mentioned how great like leading actresses were back in those days because they're always leading men. But to me, I thought she was a great leading actress.
Well, another one I would mention is I think her name is Teresa Wright in Shadow of a Doubt, the one that plays the niece. She gives a terrific performance, and I have to admit that's the type of film that I would normally resist because the premise of it sounds like it's going to be very contrived but it was very well done, and Joseph Cotton and her were terrific in it. The acting is just brilliant, and the script is so smart. It was written by Thornton Wilder, the playwright, the guy that wrote Our Town. Apparently, Hitchcock expressed an interest in working with him, and apparently Thornton Wilder was a fan, so he came and he worked with Hitchcock to make at least the first draft of the script. And you can tell because the dialogue in that is much smarter than in most other films from that time. It's delivered at such a rapid pace. Joseph Cotton worked with Orson Welles in the Mercury Theater, and he did Citizen Kane and The Magnificent Ambersons. And Orson Welles used sort of overlapping dialogue sometimes as well to give a more naturalistic feel to the dialogue. And there's a little bit of that in Shadow of a Doubt. There's a lot of scenes where everybody's talking at once. I also like the fact that the children are not obnoxious.
Right, yeah.
They're precocious, or at least one of them, the little girl, is precocious, but they're not, you don't feel like you want to become a mad strangler yourself.
Yeah.
But the only thing I would say about Shadow of a Doubt that might have limited its success, I assume it was a successful film, but it prevented it from becoming like a success on the level of Psycho, is that the ending is a little too abrupt, it seems to me.
Yeah.
Maybe he felt that he played it out long enough and there wasn't much more that could be done with that premise. But it seemed to me that it just was the end sort of comes upon you all of a sudden and it's over. But other than that, I think that's a wonderful film. And what else?
Well, real quick, The Lady Vanishes, 1938, and then there was one in 79 starring Angela Lansbury and Sybil Shepherd.
Oh.
And then there was another one in 2013 with nobody that I recognize. So they remade it twice.
Well, I would recommend that they not.
I don't think I'm even gonna watch the other ones because I love this one so much.
Yeah.
The opening, like I thought, oh, look at this cool map painting, and then I realized, wait, it's a model. That train station, it was a model. It had a little car drive by. I was like, that's really cool how they done that.
Well, all the things that he did back in those movies, and he continued to do all the way up until the 60s practically, with glass paintings and miniatures and things like that. All of those things look great in those movies because they were shooting movies. The whole approach was a sort of stylized approach. Everything looked artificial. So miniatures fit in, matte paintings fit in, rear projection, which he used all the time. All of that fit in.
Yeah, that rear projection in his films just has a charm that if it was you see it in any other movie, you're like,
well, he uses
bad. He used it, and you're like, that's awesome.
And it actually becomes part of his technique, a part of his style. When he did Family Plot, that was in the early 70s. It was really past the time when he should have been doing like driving scenes with, he didn't use rear projection, but he used like blue screen.
Yeah.
And it was really past that point. But in a way, it sort of makes the film feel more like a Hitchcock film, because it's recognizable as soon as you see it. You say, oh, I'm watching a Hitchcock movie.
I'm not sure how they done it, but in The Lady Vanishes, when the guy climbs out of the train to go into the next window and the other train passes, I thought, man, that had to have been rear projection, but I don't think it
Yeah.
was. I think he was just hanging out of an actual
Well,
train. I don't know.
he might have been hanging out outside of something, but
Yeah.
almost certainly those effects were done using rear projection because they didn't really. I mean, they had the Shufton process, which was a way of compositing different images
Yeah.
together, and I think he did use that in a couple of instances. Well, actually, the Shufton process is a process using mirrors. The sodium backing process, I think, is the one where you put people in front of a yellow screen, and I guess on black and white film that allows you to superimpose things or map things behind them. But I have a feeling probably most of the time when you see stuff like that, it's probably rear projection. He was so good at it, he got it down so well that sometimes it looks extraordinarily effective. Sometimes I have to say it doesn't look effective at all. To Catch a Thief, which has never been, is it To Catch a Thief? Yes. To Catch a Thief? Yes. That's the one with Cary Grant.
Yeah.
He has a scene there where they're driving along, and they did a lot of location footage, location shooting in France, but they have all the car stuff is all done with them sitting in, prop cars with rear projected. And in this one scene, they tried to make it a little more fancy by having her steering, and the car would actually move. It doesn't work at all.
All right. Yeah.
First of all, the camera's at the wrong angle. The camera is shooting. It almost looks like it's shooting down on them, and the horizon is straight, directly behind them. So it doesn't look right at all. There's a couple of technical imperfections in To Catch a Thief. The guy, To Catch a Thief, first of all, you could sort of see where the Bond films got the idea of Bond going to like the head of the Turkish secret police in From Russia with Love. And that guy becomes like his friend and companion, and he's sort of an eccentric figure. And you see the same character show up on Her Majesty's Secret Service. He's the head of a organized crime ring, and he's working with the British intelligence. His daughter Diana Rigg actually marries Bond in that movie, and then you see it later in For Your Eyes Only, same kind of character. And in this, you see it with Cary Grant first going to that guy who's running that restaurant. I don't know if you caught To Catch a Thief.
I started watching. That was one of the last ones I tried to watch today and just ran out of time. But I did see some of the opening.
Well, Cary Grant is accused or is thought to be the cat burglar.
Cat burglar, yeah.
So he escapes the police and he shows up at a restaurant that's being run by what I assume is a friend of his who used to be part of the French Resistance because he was in the French Resistance. And the guy is also, I guess, some sort of, maybe some sort of underworld figure or organized crime figure. Anyway, the guy who did the part was completely looped. And it was so obvious. I wonder why they allowed that, especially with Hitchcock's reputation of being the great technician.
Yeah.
To have an actor who was clearly, whose part had clearly been revoiced by another actor, I couldn't figure that out. It's very obvious. To Catch a Thief looks to me like a project that Hitchcock did as almost like a vacation.
Yeah.
Opportunity to go travel to France.
France and hang out
with beautiful people, and but it's loaded with dialogue. And this is another thing I guess we could talk about is Hitchcock started in silent films, and for the silent filmmakers, the great accomplishment was to tell the story without using too much dialogue.
Right.
Because back then, the only way you could do dialogue would be to have it printed on
a
card. And obviously, people don't want to go to a movie and see, half the picture, text on
reading
screen.
it, yeah.
So it became a point of pride. If you could make a movie that had a minimal amount of those type of titles, you had learned how to tell a story cinematically. And this is something that we hear nowadays all the time as well, that you should
Show, don't tell.
Show, don't tell, right? But coming from that background, it gave him a prejudice against the importance of sound. Once you do have sound, and once you've gone through that period, which they had to go through, where sound recording made it sort of inhibited the shooting of the movies because the cameras were bulky and there was all sorts of problems with recording. And for a time there in the early sound era, the filmmaking techniques sort of reverted to the most primitive because they had no choice. It was the only way to shoot sound films. But very quickly, they learned how to make very sophisticated films with a lot of different angles and a lot of different special effects that were also sound movies. And as proof of that, 1933, which is just a few years after the first of all sound movies, in like 27, 28, somewhere in there. By 1933, they were doing things like King Kong, which has just this amazing range of different types of photographic techniques and also sound effects. I mean, there's sound effects in King Kong that nobody ever heard before because they were just developing those techniques at the time. The special effects techniques that they developed and the equipment that they developed to carry those effects off were still being used in the 60s when they did Star Trek on the same lot where they did King Kong. So there wasn't any, there was a period when it was important not to forget how to tell a story visually just because you had sound. And Hitchcock was an important bridge, right, from the silent era to the sound era. He brought all those imaginative visual techniques into the sound era. But it's also true that as the process of making sound movies became easier, and as you became more flexible as a filmmaker, shooting movies in sound, this obsession about not doing things with dialogue, by limiting the dialogue, this isn't, this sense of this sort of prejudice against films that are all talk. That doesn't make any sense anymore. I mean, Rear Window could be done as a radio show.
Oh yeah, one of the greatest. I mean, one of my favorite scenes is at the beginning when it's just panning over and you see his leg in a cast.
Right.
And camera pans up and you see his camera and it's all destroyed. And you're like, okay. And it goes to a picture of of a car wreck. You're like, okay, so he broke his leg filming a car wreck, and then he's a reporter. We're getting all this information just by looking at.
Right.
And there's a picture of Grace Kelly. So you're like, okay, that's obviously his girlfriend, and it just keeps going. And you're right there. You just learned everything about all the neighbors and your main character without saying a word.
And that's exactly the sort of thing that you would have done in a silent movie.
Yeah.
Right? The audience would understand just by looking at all those things. And I'm glad he did it that way in Rear Window. But all the rest of the movie is all talk.
Right? Yeah, well, yeah.
And with To Catch a Thief, it's particularly damaging, I would say, because a lot of the talk isn't particularly interesting, in my opinion. There's some dialogue there that probably could have been cut and would have been cut if it had been any one of the other Hitchcock movies.
Yeah.
In this case, in the case of To Catch a Thief, he seems to be sort of taking it easy and saying, well, we'll just enjoy ourselves.
Yeah, I just always hate, and we've talked about it before, I hate films that have too much exposition. Characters got to tell the other character exactly what's going on, and they do it like too much. It's like a new character comes in, okay, we've got to catch this guy up with what's going on. And they're like, we don't need all that.
Yeah. No, I agree.
We know it can be done without all that. You know what I'm saying? We've seen movies that do it perfectly.
Redundant dialogue is certainly a mistake, but if your dialogue is as sparkling as the dialogue in Rear Window, then my feeling is the more the merrier.
Oh yeah.
There's nothing, no matter how great the silent movie may be, and there were a lot of great silent movies, there's nothing that can beat hearing a terrific actor like Thelma Ritter delivering some of that dialogue. There's no comparison, right? Silent movies are limited to a certain extent by the fact that they have to simplify everything so that everybody in the audience will understand what's going on using just pictures.
Yeah.
Once you get into the sound era, you can have a much more sophisticated story and much more sophisticated characters. And all of that can just be through the inflections in their voice or the things that they're saying, the suggestions, the hints that they're making in their dialogue. There's greater meaning to the film because you have the dialogue that can have all sorts of shades of meaning that you can't convey in a visual image. That I think is, it sort of makes me wonder why he insisted all through his career right up to the end that he was only interested in pure cinema. He clearly wasn't. He clearly was very interested in crafting these really delightful scripts that were filled with witty dialogue. I mean, obviously, the ideal situation is to be somewhere in between, where you take care of the visuals, but you also have the witty dialogue.
Yeah. Another great scene comes to mind is in Psycho, whenever Marion is driving from, she's supposed to go to the bank, but she's already decided that she's skipping town. And when she's driving through town, and it's just, just her thinking about everything that everybody's saying, or what's everybody thinking, what's everybody saying, are they looking for me? That's the most tense. Like, I get so anxious watching that scene, just watching it. I'm like, it's so effective. It's like one of the great. Then when the cop pulls her over, you're just like, oh gosh, she's caught.
But that's another example of sort of the shaggy dog story aspect of it. It's like he's putting the audience to the ringer on all these things about her worrying about, is she going to get caught, and all the business at the used car lot.
Yeah, guy giving her shit because she wants to buy a car. Yeah, what do you mean you're paying cash? Come on, nobody does that.
And then you get to a point in the story where suddenly all of that doesn't mean anything anymore.
Yeah. And I think what happens is by the time she gets to the motel, you think, okay, she's fine.
Right.
She's good now. She's gonna make it to the end. And then no, she gets hacked up in the in the shower in the next 5 minutes.
They did a movie about the Francois Truffaut Hitchcock documentary about that, the making of that book, and they have a whole bunch of filmmakers talking about it. And I think it was Peter Bogdanovich who says that when the audience, he was in the audience when Psycho premiered, and the audience didn't just scream; it was a sustained scream, all through the shower scene, because audiences never seen anything like that. Not just that they hadn't seen the violence, they had never seen the leading lady get murdered. What is it, 20 minutes, 30 minutes into the film?
Something like that, yeah. Probably less than that, probably 15. Minus the credits, Right.
So that was a real shocking thing to do, and it must have delighted him, because that's the essence of a good joke, is that the punchline is unexpected, the surprise.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing here, right? He led you all on this route that you think where you're going, and then boom, he hits you with the surprise. So he must have been having a good laugh at that.
I wonder how he talked Janet Leigh into doing that small role.
Well, she's seen, in all the interviews I've ever seen with her, she always seemed like a very intelligent person. And I guess she just must have realized that this was, well, first of all, he had quite a reputation. But to be a part of, just to have a small part in a movie that's going to become a sensation like that, must have been too good to resist. But, and the guy who played her boyfriend in that, John Gavin, I think we might have talked about this. He was actually hired to play James Bond for Diamonds Are Forever. He was actually signed, and because they weren't going to be using George Lazenby again, so they were picking their future James Bonds from Hitchcock movies.
Yeah.
If there's any further need to. Also, another. He didn't end up playing the part, obviously. They decided eventually to pay Sean Connery what he wanted, and they brought him back. But Peter Lorre, who is the villain in Man Who Knew Too Much, he would play La Shrif, if that's the name of the villain, in the first version of Casino Royale, which was done for American television in the 50s. So once again, a connection between the Hitchcock world and the Bond world. I don't know what that means, but interesting. Peter Lorre is like James Mason. He's the sort of actor that's always fun to watch, no matter what film he's in. He's a delight. So what else can we cover? The Birds? Did we talk about The Birds?
We didn't talk The Birds, but do you think that The Birds is as good as everybody thinks? says that it is or thinks it is. Because every time I watch it, I'm thinking this is going to be great, and then I'm watching, and I'm like, it's really not that good. I mean,
What disappoints you? The ending?
um, not so much the ending. I guess it's just whenever I watch it, it doesn't seem as tense or as scary as I think that as I remembered it, or as I'm hoping it's going to be going into it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I always enjoy the
There's
film.
no scenes of like real good. I guess the only scene of tension, and I won't even call it tension really, is whenever Tippi Hedren's locked in I guess the attic or one of the
Right.
upper rooms, and all the birds get in and attack her. But the rest of the movie to me is just, I don't know, it's just kind of falls flat.
Well, they have that one famous scene with her sitting on the bench outside the school
Hmm.
waiting for, and the slow buildup of all the birds flying over, and eventually she
Yeah,
looks around and they're all massed
they're
up.
all sitting on the monkey
Well,
bars.
I like the scenes in the diner. I think they play well. Uh,
Yeah,
uh, the problem with that film is,
the scenes
uh,
trapped in the house are probably my favorites when they got to block up the fireplace and all that. That's
right.
but everything else outside for some reason just falls flat. I don't know if that's because it's I don't know if it'd be more effective at nighttime or
Well, I think
maybe
it
it'd be more
probably,
effective if they weren't birds.
yeah. Well, the fact that they were trying to do something like that at that time was quite a stunt. Matter of
Yeah,
fact, they might have used sodium backing for the birds. The sodium backing process might have been used to superimpose the birds over.
yeah,
It's mostly convincing, but I think the problem, this is something I think I've said in other episodes when we were talking about Hitchcock, is that it's too artificial. It
yeah,
it would have been much more powerful if it had been done as a sort of new wave movie, shot in real places instead of being shot on sets. I don't know how you would do the business with the superimposing the birds. Maybe you need to have a movie that is all artificial in order to work that sort of element in and
yeah.
have it work at all. But I still have largely. I always enjoy watching it.
Yeah, I do
Uh,
too, but for some reason I don't think it's not what I wouldn't put it on my top 10 Hitchcock list.
yeah, and it was an unusual film for
Yeah,
Hitchcock. I mean, he didn't do too many. He didn't do any other film that involves any sort of supernatural stuff. I don't know if we consider the bird thing supernatural or science fiction
science
or
fiction. I would say science fiction, maybe. I don't know. I don't because he never. It didn't seem like it had any kind of. I know that global warming and all that. Wasn't big. Like, so I don't think it had
right.
any kind of. And it definitely didn't. It definitely wasn't saying anything about radiation or nuclear power. So it
No. Well,
wasn't trying to
fortunately,
say anything about society or anything. It was just a killer birds movie.
well, I think that's why I like the diner scene is the scene where you really get that feeling of tension when everybody's sort of discussing. It almost I assume that George Romero saw the birds before he did
Yeah.
Night of the Living Dead, but that sort of people in a confined space, something bad is happening outside, and they're debating what's going on and why it's going on. And so to hear those folks coming to terms with this
Yeah.
rather bizarre idea, the birds are attacking, that's fun,
Mm.
you know. And when they're talking about, why would the birds be attacking, or is it? And then the waitress comes out and says, "Two fried chicken."
Yeah.
Uh, those are fun touches.
Yeah. It reminds me of there's another movie that I enjoy called Squirm.
Oh yeah,
It's
yeah,
about killer earthworms. I'm like, it's basically the same movie. You know what I'm
yeah.
saying? It's
Well,
just
that
birds and
definitely,
earthworms.
yeah,
You know.
that definitely was inspired.
Yeah.
Uh, almost the almost unending series of nature attacks movies
Yeah.
and throughout the 70s. It seemed like there was a delayed reaction, possibly because nobody else could figure out how to do that type of movie.
Right.
It,
Yeah.
it was apparently quite a challenge for Hitchcock. But when they got into the 70s, suddenly we started to see a lot of those type of
Oh
movies.
yeah. Day of the Animal, Grizzly. I'm sure there were a bunch more I'm not thinking of.
Well, my favorites are the cheesy Bird Eye Gordon movies.
Yeah.
Food of the Gods. Have you ever
Oh
seen?
yeah.
And
Night of the
Empire of the
Lupus.
Ants.
Night of the
Night
Lupus.
of Lepus. There's another one. Yeah.
Yeah.
We can't blame Bird Eye Gordon for that one, but
Right. Yeah.
that was
Gigantic
another.
rabbit, so you can't go wrong there.
And I'm sure there's a whole bunch that we know. Frogs is another one that
Frogs,
was.
yeah.
Yes.
I still remember seeing that. I remember owning that on Betamax.
I saw
That cover,
frogs.
that was like the greatest cover. The
Oh
big
yeah,
bullfrog with the hand. And of
yeah.
course it was the old style, beta cover. So the actual picture was only this big. And then you had the design of like the Betamax tape or whatever.
Yeah.
Great.
I saw frogs when I was a little boy. My mother dropped me off at a local theater, and they were showing frogs and Godzilla versus the Smog Monster.
Yeah.
And I sat there with my little box of malted milk balls, Whoppers, and I tell you, I was the
Now, if
happiest
I
kid in the
remember
world.
correctly, I think the only person that dies in the movie Frogs is the guy that has a heart attack in a wheelchair at the end, right?
But that's Ray Milland. That's our
Yeah, like,
Hitchcock
but
actor.
like no one else dies in the whole movie, right?
I'm trying to, oh, there's a couple of people that die.
Okay, maybe that was just the most memorable scene.
He's the only
Yeah,
important actor that dies,
yeah,
and I guess he expires at the end just from a heart attack.
yeah, yeah.
The frogs keep croaking at him, and
But
he
yeah,
croaks.
maybe that's why it was so memorable, and I don't remember the other deaths.
Well, I watched that movie every time it was on TV after that, and I always get a kick out of it. I know
Yeah,
some people think it's terrible, but I think it's terrible in a wonderful way.
yeah,
But
W-
sometimes when you see a movie when you're a kid in a movie theater, that's true of Family Plot as well. I saw
yeah,
that when it first came out, and I was a kid, and I just enjoyed the experience of seeing it. It's not a great movie,
yeah,
but it's a fun movie, and it's pleasant, and the whole experience of seeing a film like that really was sort of the last time you really could see a movie like that. I mean, that was Hitchcock's last film, and they didn't really continue to make movies like that in that style after that. I mean, there were movies that were tried to emulate Hitchcock, but they always had other aspects to them. I suppose even to today, there are people trying to imitate Hitchcock, but the specific type of entertainment that he made,
yeah,
where he really concerned himself with the audience reaction. I suppose the only person I could think of that really was successful in doing that was Spielberg.
yeah,
So many of the films he made have that sense of humor and the suspense and the shocks or the surprise. Uh, Jaws, I guess, being a good example, but Duel as well. And
hmm
maybe it was because of Jaws, the excellence of Jaws, that Hitchcock refused to meet Spielberg. Bruce Stern talks about how Spielberg tried to meet him when he was making Family Plot, and Bruce Stern said, "Oh, you should meet him. It's just some kid. He wants to come and sit at your
yeah,
knee." And Hitchcock said that he could never meet him because he'd be so embarrassed. He would feel like a whore. And Bruce Stern asked him, "What do you mean? Why would you feel like a whore?" He says, "Well, when they did the Jaws attraction at the Universal City Studios, I did the narration for the Jaws ride." Now, it turns out that wasn't really the case. He had done
right,
a narration for something, but in his mind, somehow, uh, he felt like a whore because he had taken money to do something that was associated with promotion for Jaws.
yeah,
I think what it really was is he recognized that Spielberg was taking what he had done and going a bit further.
bigger with it, yeah,
Because I don't think Hitchcock could have done Jaws.
no,
He was too much of an old style filmmaker. He would have wanted to do it all on a studio set someplace.
that would have been great though. Jimmy
Oh,
Stewart and Cary Grant at the bottom of that boat.
yes. Well, yes, we missed something by him. But even when Spielberg was doing movies like Duel, there was very definitely a
Yeah,
Hitchcockian feel to it, and it was Hitchcock plus. Is taking it to the next level. Hitchcock specialized in doing that thing where he would sort of expand time. He would sort of focus on details and and break things down into shots so that the simplest action that in another movie would be by like that.
yeah,
It's just sort of stretched out endlessly. A good example is the Psycho shower murder, or the killing of the villain in Torn Curtain, where Paul
hmm
Newman and Eve Ullman are trying to get the guy's head in. First, they're trying to stab him with a knife, and that doesn't work. And then
yeah,
she's hitting him with stuff, and then they eventually stick him in an oven, and they have to hold him in the oven to get him. That's probably the only memorable scene in Torn Curtain. But he did that all through his career, seize on moments in the film that would normally go by in a flash and break them down, and spread them out and allow the audience to appreciate every second of it, to really get the maximum impact from it. And that's something that Spielberg became quite good at in movies like Duel and Jaws, and some of his other films.
Yeah, so I don't think a lot of people, I mean, you mentioned Spielberg, but I don't think a lot of other people try to copy his style, his look, but they've definitely remade a lot of his movies. Like whether it's, they obviously remade Rear Window, it was made for TV with Christopher Reeves, or they just take the story idea and just rename it. There was a movie called Disturbia, I think, and it was basically Rear Window. It was the kid from Transformers. I can't remember his name. Shia LaBeouf played in it. But it was basically the same storyline. This kid's under house arrest, so he can't leave.
Yeah, I remember that.
Suspects his neighbors killed somebody or killed a bunch of girls or something.
Well,
yeah, definitely copied a lot. They even made a sequel to Birds. Birds 2 Lands End, I think is what it was called. It was horrible. It was like made for Showtime or something.
Well, we won't talk about Birdemic.
Yeah.
But Psycho was actually a shot-for-shot remake done by Gus Van Sant.
Yeah, which I didn't understand.
And Gus Van Sant is a very talented filmmaker. People are still trying to figure out why he did that.
I don't know. I guess he thought maybe it was the artsy thing to do. I'm going to remake a movie and just really remake it.
Well, I guess that's never been done before.
No.
It certainly hasn't been done since. It was not a success. But I suppose people think in practical terms. They think, well, if you're going to remake the film at all, why would you want to just do what's already been done?
Yeah, and like we've talked about before, you can't change it because no one's going to like it if it's got a different ending.
Yes, that's the great quandary that anybody who's doing a remake finds themselves in. Of course, they did sequels to Psycho, and they were fairly successful.
Yeah.
And there's some people, I think Quentin Tarantino may have even been one of them, who feel that Psycho 2 is a great movie.
A good one, yeah.
Worthy companion to the original film.
Yeah.
Tarantino is apparently not a big fan of Hitchcock. So I don't know if we can necessarily take his
word for it.
Word for that.
Yeah. You'd mentioned Strangers on a Train. That was remade to Throw Mama from the Train, which was a comedy with Billy Crystal and Danny DeVito. That's a great movie. It was, it's based off that.
Right.
So it seems like it seems like he really influenced a lot of other stuff other than just his directing style.
Oh yeah, well, Brian De Palma for a while was sort of the go-to guy for Hitchcockian thrillers. A bunch of the things that he did were very similar to Hitchcock films. Dress to Kill. I mean, Hitchcock never used split screen. He never used what is that what they call it? Yeah, split screen.
Split screen, yeah.
And you see multiple pictures on the screen at once. I don't think Hitchcock ever used that.
He didn't really use a lot of big like camera tricks or effects or anything really. I mean, other than in Vertigo, I guess would have been the most.
Well, you wouldn't notice them.
Because that's what I'm saying. He did. Yeah, there weren't like a lot of
weren't obvious
split screens or
it was
big fast zooms or anything like that.
He was a big fan of matte paintings or glass paintings.
Yeah.
And The Birds is a good example. A lot of the stuff that you see of the exteriors is glass paintings.
Yeah.
Albert Whitlock, who was one of the great matte painters, he was working with Hitchcock all the way up into Family Plot. I have to admit, I can't see what he could have done in Family Plot. I'd have to watch the movie again to find where the matte paintings are. But in movies like The Birds and North by Northwest, North by Northwest is a lot of matte paintings.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of that stuff done on the Mount Rushmore, those are matte paintings.
Matte paintings, yeah.
Certain sections that have been left blank for, to superimpose the actors. Spielberg, speaking of Spielberg, I think you could say his Close Encounters of the Third Kind may be his great Hitchcock tribute film.
Right, yeah.
A lot of those scenes of Roy Neary and there's Richard Dreyfuss and Melinda Dillon trying to get over the base of Devil's Tower.
Yeah.
That's really just like the scenes with Cary Grant and Eva Marie Saint in North by Northwest, climbing around Mount Rushmore. So I think that I may have expressed this theory before. I think for Spielberg, Close Encounters was the movie where he went from being a sort of realist director, new wave director, to being a Hitchcock studio bound director.
Yeah.
Because once they get over that hump and they're on the other side of Devil's Tower, everything is done on a studio set. Actually, much earlier in the movie, a lot of the stuff is done on a set. Spielberg had reached that point where he wanted the same sort of complete control that Hitchcock was always looking for.
Yeah.
So he would have, like, even if it's just a country road, he'd have the whole fucking thing built on a set.
Yeah.
Which is
I don't
probably
know. But when I was watching a lot of these today, a lot of the ones that are on set, Rear Window, 39 Steps, I'm assuming was probably on a lot of sets. What else? What else did I watch? That for Murder would have been sets. But then when I started watching To Catch a Thief, and they got that big sweeping helicopter scene over, and I was like, oh, that doesn't seem like Hitchcock to me. It didn't feel like a Hitchcock movie because it was so vast and wide open, and it wasn't a set,
And that cinematography was up for an. Did you mention that already? That cinematographer was up for an Oscar for.
Oh no, I was talking about the cinematographer for Vertigo.
Oh, okay. Well,
might have been Robert Burks.
Might have been the same guy. I don't know,
Yeah.
but it's a beautiful looking movie, and you're right. It does have a lot of that sort of color photography and a lot of beautiful exterior shots, but it's all stuff that doesn't have the lead actors in.
Yeah.
I mean, another instance of all those overhead shots that you're describing when they're driving around in the mountains, that looks very similar to stuff that they would later do in Goldfinger.
Oh, yeah.
But Hitchcock had no objection to employing second units. He sent them out to
do that. Yeah.
He gave him very specific instructions. Everything was storyboarded. And a lot of times they would shoot, in addition to those shots that you're describing, they would shoot background plates.
Mm-hmm.
And then he would do the stuff with the actors in the studio with that either blue screen behind them or rear projected behind them. And that pretty much is the way To Catch a Thief works out. If you watch the film, you can see that there are some scenes where the actors are actually in real places.
Right, yeah.
But it's usually walking. They walk through the shot. And then when they get to the scene with the dialogue, then suddenly they're in front of a rear screen. I mean, it's one of the problems for a modern audience, this artificiality that his films have. And I think this is particularly true. One of the reasons why The Birds it maybe isn't as impactful as it once was is because it's so obvious in The Birds. I mean, it's at a point in the development of a film where people are sort of hoping you'd be beyond that. But in The Birds, Hitchcock was so allergic to doing location shooting that the very first scene that we see Tippi Hedren, and she's getting off a streetcar in San Francisco, and she crosses the street. That's real. She actually got off a real streetcar. Yeah. She crossed the street. And then as she's crossing the street, the camera has a street sign or something pass in front of it. And when it comes out the other side, they're on a set.
They're on a set, yeah.
They're on a set of a street with the pet shop that she's going into. So he couldn't even do one continuous pan without escaping to the studio.
Yeah, I noticed in Down for Murder, the scenes outside to me look like they were projected. Yes. It's like, oh, okay. I mean, it works. It works in the movie. It didn't bother me at all. I didn't mind it. Yeah. Like I said, that rear projection in these older movies have a charm that you enjoy.
Well, also you sort of it's part of that world, right? I mean, it's not a realistic world. We understand that right at the beginning. So we accept all these things as being part of that world, a sort of Hitchcockian or cinematic world that they just use those sort of techniques. But by the time you get to Birds, because he was going for sort of a visceral horror there, it would be much more powerful if we really believe we're in a real place.
Yeah.
And this is one of the reasons why I feel it's a terrible shame that with a lot of horror films that are being made nowadays, they are doing stuff on sets and they're doing a lot of stuff in front of green screens.
Green screen, yeah.
And there's a lot of CGI, and it makes the thing look like stuff from a video game,
Yeah.
rather than feeling like you're in a real situation where people are really in peril. And I don't care how cool the CGI is, it's not going to be
It's not going to
horrifying.
work. Yeah.
So that might be his way. There's a scene in, I saw The Birds when I was in my one and only year of film school. I saw it with my in a film class. And the scene that got the biggest laugh, unintentional laugh, was when Rod Taylor and Tippi Hedren are attending that party for the little girl. Is it Angela Cartwright? No, it's Veronica Cartwright, who would later go on to play the pilot in Alien.
Yeah.
And they're having the party, and the kids are all playing blind man's bluff or something, and the two of them leave the party and they go up a hill to have a sort of private chat. And by the house, the backyard of the house, that's all real. By the time they get up the hill, they're standing on this obvious set.
Yeah.
So fake, with a painted cyclorama behind them. And the audience I saw it with, this film school audience, everybody was laughing, because it was so obvious, You can't stick with a real location, for a minute. It has to flee back to the studio. And I guess it's because he felt he had the greatest control. It's also true, though, that we're watching everything now on Blu-ray. I saw the version.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So we see all these little imperfections that audiences would never have noticed back when they were seeing it projected on a screen in a theater. The clarity of the picture just was not the same. First of all, they were watching prints that had been made from the original master, so they wouldn't have been, it's not first generation. And also they're watching it being projected by probably a projectionist who doesn't give a shit about focus.
Or cleaning the lens, or
cleaning the glass in front of the, and probably being projected on a dirty screen.
Yeah.
Because back then everybody was smoking in the theaters. So the audience wouldn't have noticed that. They wouldn't have noticed any of the little jiggling of Mount Rushmore and North Point. That stuff, and they would not have noticed. But now we notice it because we're seeing everything in a way that Hitchcock never intended. He counted on the fact that the audience wasn't going to see it in its pristine state. He counted on the fact that they were going to see it in a slightly degraded condition, because that hid all those little mistakes or those little technical flaws. So I guess we can't blame him.
No.
But
every time I watch old movies like this, I just think of the anxiety they must go through on shooting on film, waiting to get that film back to see if they even got the shot. It's like now it's instant. You film and you look at it. Back then, you had to let it go out and I don't know how long it took to process film back then. I don't know how many days it took before they got it back and got to see their dailies. But I can imagine the stress of, do we have to do that again?
And even more stress because when the director was on the set was shooting, if he did 10 takes, he might only say print one.
Yeah.
And he printed the one that he thought
was the best one. So I would say that probably that stress is probably why you want to be on a set. It's more controllable. You know what I'm saying? Lighting wise and all that. That may explain it.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, there really was no, certainly in the days when he first started in the 20s and 30s, there was no way to shoot these things in real places.
Yeah. I mean, they didn't even have a monitor to look at, right? Just the eyepiece of the camera. And
even if he had a monitor, which didn't really exist, I think, until it was only in the 60s when I think it was Jerry Lewis, of all people, that first started to use a video camera so he could see what the camera was seeing. But even if Hitchcock had that, I don't think he would have used it.
Probably not.
His thing was, I planned everything out. I hire the best people. And if I look at the camera and I see what lens you're using, I know whether or not you're going to be
it's going to work. Yeah.
And that he prided himself on that. So I don't even know if he ever, usually directors will get a peek in the camera to see how the shot has been set up.
Yeah.
DP will ask the director to check the shot.
What's the other thing that you see? I see Spielberg with it all the time. Hangs it around his neck.
Viewfinder?
Yeah. Is that just a viewfinder, or does that have can they replicate different lenses with that little?
Yes, that's the purpose of it. He wants to see if that shot is going to
Wide
look the
shot,
way he
medium
wants.
shot. Yeah,
Right,
what do we want?
right. So, but
I think that's the first time I've seen one with Spielberg. He always wore. He
yeah,
always is that him that wears? He wears it around his neck, or is it?
there are photos with him with
Yeah,
doing that and looking through it. I don't think there's any photos with Hitchcock ever looking through a
no,
viewfinder. There might be some shots of him looking through the camera,
right,
actually at the camera, looking through the viewfinder of the camera. But uh, yeah, he showed up every day. He liked a very workmanlike approach.
right.
He wanted to come in at a certain time and go home at a certain time. He wasn't one of these people that wanted to
Stay all day.
after
Yeah,
midnight, And he showed up every day with his black suit and tie, and he expected his crew to be properly dressed, and he wanted it to be, I suppose, like a factory environment.
yeah,
And he said something to, I think it was William Devane or Bruce Stern on his last film about how important it was when he was in the studio and he sees all those people coming in the morning with their lunch pail and whatnot. He says, "We're doing this for them. We're keeping them employed."
right.
He was delighted by the idea of being able to be a part of that process that employs this large number of people. Everybody is an expert in what they do, and they're turning out a product that makes vast amounts of money when it works. And he liked that idea. That was a motivation for him. And when he decided that he couldn't continue after he'd finished Family Plot, which apparently was a bit of a struggle for him because he wasn't in good health,
Right.
and he called one of his I think it was assistant director or one of the associate producer or somebody like that. Oh, actually, it was a production designer, I think. Somebody had worked with quite a bit. He called him to his office and he said, "I can't go on. No, I can't do it anymore." And the guy said, "Well, why not?" They already had a script. He said, "You don't have to." Hitchcock said, "I can't go on location anymore."
Yeah,
And he said, "Well, you don't have to go on location. Just tell us what you want us to shoot." I said, "No, I can't do it." And he said, "You have to tell Lou Wasserman." That's the head of the studio. He was too embarrassed. He
yeah,
felt like he was letting people down by dying. Just
yeah.
as a dedicated fellow.
Yeah. I can't die. Everybody will hate me.
Well, I mean, he also managed to make himself a very wealthy man because
Yeah,
he, with the proceeds from Psycho and some of his other films, Psycho, I think especially, was an enormously profitable film for him. And because the project started at Paramount. Paramount didn't want to do it. So Hitchcock basically ended up, I guess, pitching in a good part of the money, and he did it with his crew from the TV show.
oh yeah,
That's why Psycho has a feel that's similar to his TV show. It was actually shot with his TV people.
that was at NBC. Is it on the Universal backlot? Is that where the house is
It was
at?
shot on the
Okay, okay.
Universal backlot, yes. Apparently, he was in the process of transitioning over to Universal because a few years after Psycho had been released, Paramount sold its interest to Universal. So now it's strictly, even though it still has Paramount's name on the front of it, it's a Universal. All that stuff is owned by Universal, and he became a Universal guy I think for the rest of his life.
Mm-hmm.
Not that it was that much longer. It did Birds and Torn Curtain, Topaz, Frenzy, and Family Plot. Frenzy is an interesting example of the one movie he made that was really completely naturalistic. He didn't do it all on location. They actually used sets, but they had figured out by that point that they had to make the sets look like real places.
Yeah.
Match the real places that they were shooting in elsewhere. And that's not my favorite Hitchcock film. It's interesting, has some interesting moments in it, but it's a little too cruel and a little too mean-spirited.
Yeah. What was the first one he cameoed in? Because I know that was his big thing too.
Oh, I don't remember.
I noticed he was on the. I know where he's at in Rear Window, Psycho, obviously. And I noticed today when I was watching Catch a Thief, he's on the bus whenever.
That's one of his more obvious ones.
Obviously, yeah, because he's like on there for a couple minutes. I can't remember what the first one. I noticed I didn't notice him in any of the early films that I watched, like 39 Steps or any of those.
Well, he's in there.
Is he? Okay.
His first one, I think, was in The Lodger. I think he plays one of the people that's chasing the guy at the end, or one of the spectators. And I think that at that point, it was really just a functional thing. They needed somebody, you know. By the time he got to the 39 Steps, I don't know if he was really recognizable. He was recognizable to me when I watched the movie, but it doesn't look like it was meant to be recognized.
Yeah.
So it probably was with the later films that it started. Once the word got out that he was actually in these films, then people started doing just what we're doing now.
Yeah.
Say, where's Waldo?
Yeah. Yeah.
And he said that with the later movies, he started putting himself into the film earlier and earlier so that people wouldn't spend the whole movie wondering when he was going to pop up. In Family Plot, I guess he's just a silhouette. So his last appearance in a movie was just as the black silhouette on a glass window.
I guess The Birds is the one where he walks past the pet shop with the dog.
That's right, and those were
that's like his dogs.
Two beloved dogs.
Yeah, I think that's the more famous one that everybody talks about.
Well, he certainly got it in right at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
But Birds is interesting because the idea was to start the movie as this is similar to what we were talking about with Psycho, where it's sort of structured like a joke, where you start a movie and the audience thinks that this is going to be like a romantic comedy.
Yeah.
And then it's going along very nicely, and then suddenly a bird swoops down, hits her on the head, and it's a completely different type of movie from that point on, right?
So back then, I can imagine. I mean, if there weren't trailers, and I imagine they probably had trailers for these back then, right? For these movies.
He did a trailer that was very similar to the trailer he did for Psycho, where he just walked through the story.
Yeah. Basically. So, but I can imagine it being more effective if you had no clue. You know what I'm saying? If you're going into it with, oh, look, it's a comedy or a love story, and then the birds attack. You know, it'd be more. But if you know if you're anticipating that eventually birds are going to attack and kill people, kind of takes away from it. You know, but that was my problem with the movie Predator. I think if I would have went into that movie not knowing anything about it, oh, look, it's just an action movie. This army troop is going into the jungle to rescue these people, and then they get attacked by an alien. But at the beginning of the movie, they show the alien ship crash on Earth, and I'm like, okay, well then you just if you didn't know anything about it going into it, it would have been the greatest movie ever.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, sometimes giving too much.
That's why I hate trailers. Yeah, that's why I hate watching. I was like, oh, did you see the new trailer? No. I'm gonna go into the movie not knowing anything. I don't, and especially nowadays, they give away the whole movie in the trailer.
Yeah,
you'll lose the enjoyment of it.
One can assume that with a lot of movies that are made now and back in the day, the best stuff is the stuff that's in the trailer. And so if it looks really great, that's not necessarily a guarantee that the rest of the movie is going to be that great. But the trailers that he would do would play on his persona.
Yeah.
You know, it's him talking to the audience.
Him on set, yeah.
And I suppose that might have been effective, particularly for Psycho, because people might have gone to it thinking it was kind of a funny movie, you know. It's maybe something like The Addams Family or something, you know, it's a kind of a dark comedy. But it certainly wasn't that.
No.
Psycho is the first movie that they have a toilet in.
A flushing toilet. That's what, yeah.
And it's the first studio film where the actress is in a bra. Is that right?
That could be it, yeah.
The beginning of the film. So a lot of these things that were considered shocking at the time don't really shock anybody anymore.
Right, oh yeah.
But, and I suppose in that sense, that's the big problem that Hitchcock faced, was that he was, you think about it, it's an amazing career. He started silent there and he was still making movies in the 70s.
Yeah.
So if he isn't really doing hip stuff anymore, it's not really surprising, right?
Yeah.
It would really be amazing if he had been doing movies that were as fresh as things that Truffaut was doing. That would really be astonishing. He would have to be a completely different filmmaker, you know. But he did, towards the end, he did talk about a project that I guess was going to be more sexually explicit and more experimental, because I think he saw a lot of those European filmmakers, what they were doing, and he really admired it, and he wanted to try to get on the bandwagon, get some of that sort of attention.
Yeah.
But he apparently couldn't get it off the ground. The studios weren't interested in financing it. So, and probably it's just as well.
Yeah.
the idea of a man his age doing a sexy movie in the late 60s, early
God,
70s.
yeah. Think about what his cameo would be in that one.
Yeah, yes, that's
Naked man in the corner or something.
one shudders to think.
Yeah.
But all the question of sex is something that floats over all of his movies. For a person who appeared to be essentially sexless, the fact that so many of his films are essentially about sex,
Yeah.
is really interesting. And I know he said that when he was doing one of his early films, they were on location somewhere, and the actress had to jump into a river or something, and she couldn't do it. Wasn't an English speaker, didn't speak fluent English, but she indicated to the crew why she couldn't do it, and Hitchcock asked them, and they said she's menstruating, and he had no idea what they were talking about.
Right.
And this is something that he emphasizes frequently in the interview they do with Truffaut, is his naivete about sexual matters.
Yeah.
He tries to make himself sound like a kid, and all this stuff is new to him. But at the same time, he just loves double entendre dialogue.
Oh yeah.
Every one of his films has something suggestive in it. And he also did a lot of films that touch on homosexuality.
Mm-hmm.
Even fairly early on, I think one of the silent movies he did had some homosexual theme. But obviously,
39 steps. There were the scene where the woman comes into the room and the two guys are in bed together. I don't know if it was supposed to have been, they were supposed to be a gay couple, or if it was just there was no heat. So we're trying to just keep warm, but I mean, it was.
Oh, and the lady vanishes.
Yeah, and the lady
Yes,
vanishes.
yes.
Yeah, wrong movie. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure they were. I mean, homosexuality wasn't just invented.
Well,
So
yeah, I know that, but it wasn't as like people didn't put it on film as much.
Right. Well, he did one movie where it actually was a key part of the story, where somebody murdered someone to cover up, suspicion of them being involved in something. But he did Rope, where the play obviously had those characters as gay characters.
Right.
I guess it's based on Leopold and Loeb murders, a murderer, which is a famous murder trial. Those guys were a gay couple. And the guy who played in Rope, Folly Granger, he was gay, and he played in Strangers on a Train, not as a gay man, but as a character who was interacting. There was a homoerotic or homosexual angle to their relationship, the relationship between him and Guy.
Right.
And Guy is very definitely sort of a coded gay character. Another mother character also. His mother is sort of empty-headed, eccentric, and he hates his father. So this is Hitchcock getting all Freudian on us.
Yeah.
And he used Montgomery Clift in I Confess. Montgomery Clift was one of the few. I don't know if he was open, but it was known that he was gay.
Yeah.
And Hitchcock seemed to have a curiosity about those guys, and I guess it came down to he couldn't really even grapple with heterosexuality, and I guess he was just amazed that there could be guys that would actually be, would allow themselves to be known as homosexuals. It must have just tickled his curiosity, and that's something that keeps popping up in his movies.
All right.
Whether or not because he's essentially a sexless creature, but maybe he had some curiosity about that as well. It's interesting. People always talk about how he tortures his leading ladies, but he tortured some of his leading men as well.
Too, yeah.
And the fact that he picked somebody like Cary Grant, who's probably the best looking guy in movies at the time, to be his repeated sort of surrogate in films. And Cary Grant was also gay. That probably wasn't something that Hitchcock knew.
Right.
But so it's interesting to see how sex and also deviant, what would have been considered at the time perverse or deviant sexual tastes are all sort of intermingled. His obsession with mothers is something that runs through all his films as well.
Yeah.
The Notorious Mother and the North by Northwest Mother and the Strangers on a Train Mother and the Birds Mother. And I think the Birds, probably the mother gets the most interesting arc, because her story basically is she's afraid of losing her family. She's afraid of losing people that she can take care of.
Right.
And by the end of the movie, she has somebody finally to take care of, right? The least likely person.
Yeah.
But now she has a child to protect again. So that was an interesting insight, I think. And some of those scenes that he has after the initial bird attack in the house, where Jessica Tandy is sort of walking around trying to clean things up.
Yeah.
That's very well done, like she's touching like teacups or something, and the dead bird falls off and she jumps in. That's to have that going on while he's talking with the sheriff is a nice counterpoint, As you see how it's affecting her personally, emotionally, while they're talking about what has happened, the details of what has happened, and the fact that I guess he has Tippi Hedren watching her, so she's gaining an insight into the character as well. So that's good. I like the fact that he did movies like that, and rather than just focusing on birds, he focused on the people.
On the people, the characters,
It's a story about
that's the most important part of the movie. Yes. The movies, anyways, are the characters. If you don't have good characters, who cares what's attacking them?
And in a sense, it's the story of the Tippi Hedren character and the mother. Their story actually is resolved. We don't know how the bird situation is going to be resolved,
right?
But in a sense, it can't really be resolved in one movie, right? There would be no point in trying to resolve it.
Right. Yeah.
So the guy who wrote the script said he had an additional scene of them going to getting to the San Francisco, the Golden Gate Bridge, and it's all covered with birds. And there's a scene of them trying to get across the bridge or something like that. Anyway, Hitchcock threw all of that away. Yeah. He knew that he had made his point. He didn't need to go any further.
Well, he definitely picked some of the most beautiful leading ladies in movies. Yeah. Every single one of the movies I've watched so far have been nice.
I have to say, like I said, I think Grace Kelly is almost supernatural. Physical beauty, and all the other people, most all of the other people that he used in his movies, all the actresses are remarkably glamorous and attractive. Perhaps Family Plot, or actually Frenzy would be the first instance where he wasn't really using particularly glamorous women.
Right.
I don't think there's anybody in either one of those films. Well, Karen Black is in Family Plot. I guess she would have been considered as glamorous as you get at that point in film history. Funny thing was, she ended up being the star of that movie. She had enough success right around that time. She had like 2 or 3 big hits. So she ended up being the top billed person, at least on the movie posters. William Devane, that was I think his first film. And Bruce Dern had done a lot of other stuff, including doing a lot of other stuff with Hitchcock. He was in Marnie. He played the abusive father.
Oh, yeah.
And then he did a bunch. I guess he got along so well with Hitchcock that Hitchcock got him into a bunch of his TV shows. So by the time he did Family Plot, he was an old friend. Hitchcock told him that he wasn't the first choice, though. Dern asked him, why did you pick me? And he said, because Mr. Paquino asked for $1 million. Mr. Paquino is Al Pacino.
Yeah.
So he was actually pretty snotty with his actors.
Yeah.
He originally hired Roy Thinnes to play William Devane's part in Family Plot. No, I'm sorry. He originally wanted William Devane. William Devane wasn't available, so he hired Roy Thinnes. And they had actually shot some of the movie when William Devane became available. He just fired Roy Thinnes. Roy Thinnes apparently confronted him in a restaurant. Came right up to his table and said, "Why'd you fire me?" And Hitchcock didn't say anything. He just stared at him eventually Roy Thinnis walked off. But after the movie was completed, after William Devane, and I thought William Devane was very entertaining in that movie. I thought he did a terrific job. But what Bruce Dern says that he was sitting with him in a screening, and afterwards he turned to him and, referring to William Devane, he said, I think I've made a terrible mistake. He wasn't pleased with William Devane.
Yeah.
And he didn't like Karen Black. So he didn't have a nice word for anybody. But I guess he was old and losing his patience.
Yeah. You know, one thing I always think about when I watch his movies, or any of these movies from this time era, what happened to guys wearing three-piece suits all the time?
You mean me now?
Yeah, like what? That's never came back. And I think if that came back, I would do it. I would totally wear a three-piece suit all the time.
Well, I think
no matter how hot it is. I mean, I can imagine it being, 100 degrees outside, and you're, they're out there in a suit jacket and a button-up shirt. But
well, things have changed in our society.
It just seemed like a cool style back then. You know what I'm saying?
Well, you ever see pictures of like city streets back in the 30s, right up into the 60s?
Yeah.
And what you see is a sea of men wearing suits. Hats, and you see a sea of women wearing dresses.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, that just ceased to be the case.
I'm going to blame hippies. I'm going to say hippies destroyed that. That's probably when it happened.
Two factors, I think. First of all, the ability of clothes manufacturers to turn out clothes in a wide variety of styles.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the day, Alan Bennett, the writer, British writer, he talks about how his father had two suits. That was it. That was his wardrobe. Had one suit for work and one suit for special occasions. And because he was a butcher, the suit that he wore at work was always greasy. So you had to have a special suit for special occasions. But that was it. And for most men, that was the case.
That was the case, yeah.
I remember my father, he worked as a superintendent for the housing authority. And he always wore the blue uniform that he wore as a superintendent. He wore that around the house. He wore that when he was at work. That was his uniform. So that was like the working class version of a suit. Sometimes you would see guys in those sort of work clothes, like gas station attendants and things like that.
Right, yeah.
But it's also true that it made storytelling much easier, because not just the suits, but there was sort of a uniform way that people behaved. You could tell stories in a way so that every member of the audience knew how characters would behave just by the way they dressed.
By the way they dressed, yeah.
And you can't do that anymore, right?
No.
I mean, you watch movies now, and it's like everybody's wearing t-shirt and jeans, and it's almost impossible to glean anything about their character from their mode of dress. Right?
Yeah.
But that's also the youth culture. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
50s came along, and everybody started to want to dress like a teenager. And we're probably still in that phase, myself included.
Yeah.
Dressing like a teenager is certainly much less expensive than wearing suits all the time.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've got cartoon T-shirts and stuff I wear. But I think if that style came back, I would totally do it.
Well, maybe you should try. You'll be the guy that brings it back.
I could bring it back. You see me at Walmart stocking shelves in a three-piece suit.
Well, it's funny to think that even as late as Francis Ford Coppola, there were directors that insisted that their crew wear suits.
Suits, yeah.
I know Francis Ford Coppola was doing that right up until fairly late. He felt that was important to create the feeling that everybody was a professional. He didn't like the idea of people showing up in cutoffs and things like that.
Yeah. Of course, I know that they didn't wear suits all the time. I know I've seen cardigans and sweaters or whatever. I know there's different styles, but I just think that every time you see those movies, every time you watch a movie, they're always in suits.
Well, they were always when you look at the importance of the suit for Cary Grant in those movies. I mean, he's almost, with the exception of a few scenes where he's in North by Northwest, where he's wearing a bath towel or something like that. He's almost always in a suit. The suit is like a part of his character, right? And that became true for James Bond as well. You look at the early Bond films, and that suit is
the suit. Yeah,
that's him. That defines the character. So it is important. I mean, to be able to know what role the character is playing, what role that actor is playing in the film, the position he holds in the sort of hierarchy of the cast. Is this an important person?
Yeah.
In the story. If they're dressed in a suit and wearing a tie right away,
you think, yeah, there must be important.
Must be somebody we should be paying attention to.
Of course, I even like Jimmy Stewart's pajamas in Rear Window. I like some of those. They look really comfortable.
I'm surprised they don't have a line of clothing fashions from Hitchcock films.
Yeah.
Because he was very particular about the clothes, especially the leading ladies wore.
Oh yeah.
You know, he had Edith Head in there doing designs. Edith Head became famous as Hollywood's best costume designer, probably to a certain extent because of the work she did on Hitchcock's films.
Right.
But Jimmy Stewart is always wearing a suit. I thought it was interesting. Well, in Vertigo, I think he gets out of the suit for a brief time after he rescues Kim Novak from the water.
From the water, yeah.
But throughout most of the rest of the movie, he's wearing a suit and tie and wearing a hat. Now, Rear Window is unusual, but that's only because he was kind of less.
Yeah.
We wouldn't expect him to be sitting in a wheelchair wearing a suit, but yeah, I think that's an important part of being a guy that worked in silent movies. He wanted to be able to use sort of like iconic imagery. He wanted the audience to know at a glance who these people are.
Yeah.
So the suit and the hat and the tie, particularly if it was an expensive suit or a fashionable suit, that was an important thing to be able to help the audience to understand who this person is and how they should take him.
Yeah.
But and I sort of missed that in a way because I remember, of course, as a Bond fan, I remember all through the Bond series, even when the Roger Moore era was upon us, that there was something exciting about seeing somebody who was the sort of perfect person, right? An icon, somebody you could look up to and say, what's the one thing we can imitate? Oh, we can get a suit like that.
We can get a suit, yeah.
I mean, the rest of you can't look like Roger Moore, you can't look like Sean Connery, but you can wear a suit.
Yeah.
And I guess that's, to a large extent, that's what Hollywood movies were all about for a long time, was sort of presenting these role models to us, right? Giving us an idea of how we should behave as men or women.
Right, yeah.
And now, of course, everything has become so complicated in those regards that it's a free-for-all. You know, you never know how you should take characters.
Yeah.
And it makes storytelling a little more complicated. I'm not objecting to it. I think it's a healthy thing.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But there's something that even the most, how should we say, revolutionary or rebellious person, there's a certain comfort that they must take when they watch these old movies and they realize there was a time when everybody pretty much knew how they should be, how they should dress, how they should act. You know, it's not a world that we would necessarily want to live in now, but it's comforting to occasionally escape into that world.
All right.
So
what's your overall favorite Hitchcock film?
Well, I think I'm probably with you on Rear Window being very near the top. I suppose Rear Window, Psycho, I would include The Birds, Strangers on a Train, and Notorious. Those would be my top ones. The Man Who Knew Too Much, 39 Steps, and The Lady Vanishes are also, I mean, they were a little too light and a little too frivolous to really put them at the very top, but they're wonderful movies. And certainly from a technical standpoint, they're very impressive. Even now, to be able to watch movies from so long ago and to be caught up in them so completely is remarkable, you know. So those would be the ones. Vertigo, I've never been a terrific fan of. I appreciate it, but I don't love it. North by Northwest, I used to like it a lot more than I do now.
I think I do too. I think I don't know. I remember liking it a lot when I'd seen it before, but I don't know. I guess it just didn't stick with me.
Yeah, it might be the same problem that I have with The Birds, and that it's a little too artificial.
Yeah.
You know, and it's talk about a contrived plot. I mean, I know they were intentional. But Frenzy, you know, interesting, but not one of his greats. Family Plot, I would say, pleasant, and not a terrible way to go out, but not a particularly memorable film. The one, I guess, or the two that I would say that I'm particularly impressed with now, that I wasn't really that impressed with in the past, is Shadow of a Doubt and Rope.
Mm-hmm.
Shadow of a Doubt was a real revelation. That's an excellent movie, and I'm going to watch that again soon.
I'll have to put that on my list. I didn't get to that one this time.
And Rope is one that I don't think anybody really ever thought was particularly important. And now I'm seeing increasingly videos popping up on YouTube of people reassessing it.
Yeah,
Saying,
it was remade, I think, in the early 2000s. I think I remember seeing a remake of it.
Well, that particular version, I haven't seen the remake, but that particular version, I think, is very interesting and very impressive in its way. It's kind of a simplistic handling of those themes,
Yeah,
but it still has a remarkable dramatic impact. And the fact that it's so simple is what impresses me, that you can generate that much suspense with a premise that's so simple and basic. Also, Notorious. I think that's another one that I would really point to and say, even if you've seen it and you weren't particularly impressed by it, go back and watch it again, because it'll sneak up on you. You begin to realize how beautifully done it is.
Yeah.
It's really a terrific movie.
Yeah. Well, like I said, Rear Window is definitely my top #1 Hitchcock film of all time. I don't know if it's because it's the first one I've seen or because it's just that great of a movie. I'm going to say it's because it's that great of a movie.
Yeah, I think it is.
But I'd always been a fan of his later films. This one, Vertigo, Psycho, obviously I really enjoy Psycho. But doing this episode and going back and watching older stuff that I'd never seen before, 39 Steps, I think is great.
Yeah.
The Lady Vanishes is another great one. That one from I'm going to go back and watch a lot of his. I started watching Rebecca.
Oh yeah,
that was really interesting. I didn't get to finish it because we were getting ready to start, but
and a very unusual
I'm
film.
gonna go back and finish that one because I didn't know where it was going to. I was like, I don't know where this is going.
that might be one of the rare instances where Hitchcock did something that was really not his thing. It was David O. Selznick signed him to that project, but it actually turned out very well, probably because the source material was strong enough, intriguing enough, and he could bring his little touches to it. It's not really a Hitchcock film, but it's a beautifully crafted film, and it's very, very interesting and entertaining. So yeah, that's definitely a good one. There's a bunch of like Paradigm Case and Spellbound. Some people might be fans. I always felt that they were a little too gimmicky.
Yeah, I may go back and give Murder another shot because it seemed like it was probably going to be a jury courtroom drama, maybe.
Oh.
A big one. Just whenever I was watching it, a big chunk of the cast in the opening credits it just said the jury.
Oh boy!
It listed everybody, so I'm like, okay, maybe I'll go back and give it another shot. But
yeah, well, I mean, I think the thing that we come away with is a realization that it's pretty obvious why he's considered such a great filmmaker. For somebody to have so many great movies where even the lesser films are entertaining.
Yeah, I mean, just having this discussion, I've gained more respect for him than I did before we talked. When you mentioned how long he'd been doing it and how many great movies he had in that time. Most people fall off after 3 or 4 movies.
Oh yeah.
And he just kept going and just all these great movies. And I've got so many more that I gotta go back and catch up on and watch.
Yeah. Well, his ability to tell stories that had a sort of personal element to them, he's there's a little bit of him in the story, but at the same time, they're very entertaining, very accessible to audiences.
Yeah.
That is a unique gift. So yeah, we won't see his like again, I don't think.
No. And I didn't get to rewatch any of the Hitchcock Presents.
No, I haven't watched it.
But I remember liking it when it was on.
Oh yeah.
When I'd watch reruns on syndication or whatever.
It was a very entertaining show.
He didn't really direct any though. He just done the opening.
Well, he directed a couple of them,
Did
but
he? Okay.
Not every episode by any means. I think it started originally as it had a different title when it started.
Was it supposed to be like a competition for like Twilight Zone or Night Galleries or something, or was it just?
Well, interestingly, the people who worked on Boris Karloff's thriller show, they claim that he maneuvered things so that they got canceled.
So he could move in.
Right. They weren't doing Hitchcockian stuff, but they were doing black and white, hour-long horror show
Yeah.
that I guess some people might have thought was similar to the type of stuff Hitchcock
Yeah.
does.
Now Hitchcock Presents though wasn't horror though. It was more
No, no.
murder,
Yeah, he never
murder
really did
mysteries. Yeah.
more suspense stories. There were elements of the macabre and the grotesque
Yeah.
in all those stories and in all his movies. But with the exception of Psycho and The Birds and Frenzy, yeah, he never really did anything that could be called horror.
Or yeah.
But at the time, he seemed to have that. People seemed to sort of mush all of that stuff together. They saw him as being part of that genre.
Yeah.
When he saw the success that Boris Karloff's Thriller had, I guess he had some contacts with the networks that was airing. I forget which network it was airing Boris Karloff, and I guess he just put in the word that he'd be willing to do a show like that, but they had to get rid of Boris first.
Yeah.
So Boris went, and he came on, and he was on for years.
Oh yeah. Like I said, I remember watching it in reruns, but
Yeah.
I haven't seen it in a long time. I'm sure it's available somewhere.
Oh yeah, I
On
imagine
Tubi or somewhere.
Yeah, I imagine it's all out on DVDs and probably on. You might even be able to find some of them on YouTube.
Yeah.
But fun show, always entertaining. He relied more. He picked stories more on the basis of the surprise twist at the end.
Yeah.
That wasn't really something he did in his movies that much. Most of his films weren't like O. Henry stories where the whole thing was just
Yeah.
surprise at the end. But it made for a good TV show, to have surprise twists.
Yeah.
And of course, he knew enough about production by that time that he could make a very slick TV show, probably better. Boris Karloff was sort of hit and miss. They had some great episodes and they had some not so great episodes. But I seem to remember Alfred Hitchcock being very consistent. The episodes were always solid,
I don't think I've seen a Twilight Zone episode that I hated.
Well, Twilight Zone was very good as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a couple of ones that were on the weak side. Usually when Twilight Zone tried to do comedy episodes, they floundered a little bit. But yeah, they were consistent. Twilight Zone and Alfred Hitchcock Presents and Thriller might have benefited from the fact that they all had a unique look. I think it's particularly true of Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
A lot of people wonder, well, why can't they do that again? And that's plenty of great stories to tell. Why can't they? It's because that show had a special look to it.
Yeah. I mean, they have the new version, but it's not as good.
Doesn't seem to have taken the world by storm.
No.
I don't think you can do it. I mean, if I was, who's the fellow, the talented director, the Peele?
Yeah, Jordan Peele.
I would have said to him, don't do the Twilight Zone. Do something like the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, do something.
Come up with your own version of the Twilight Zone. And then people can appreciate it for what it is instead of constantly comparing it
to the Twilight Zone, yeah.
Because you can't do the Twilight Zone. Even Rod Serling couldn't do the Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
He tried to do Night Gallery.
Night Gallery wasn't as good, yeah.
No, didn't work.
A
couple of good episodes. But
yeah.
nothing
and then
like
they brought back Twilight Zone, I guess, in the 90s at some point. It wasn't as good. The Outer Limits they tried to bring back. Right. It had a couple of good episodes, but didn't last long. So
yeah, it's always, if you look at the names on the screen that most people don't bother looking at, those people are what made those shows good.
Yeah.
The certain actors that they were always using, certain directors that they were always using. On, for instance, The Outer Limits, Stefano was the guy that wrote the script for Psycho.
Yeah.
And he had a certain thing in mind when he created The Outer Limits. He had a certain type of story that he wanted to tell. So there was a consistency. There was a thematic consistency through the show, right? I mean, the same is true of Star Trek as well, right? You have a person who has an idea of what they want to do. May not be a perfect idea,
right?
But it's a consistent idea, and you see the same types of things every episode. When they update these shows, like The Twilight Zone, particularly now, they are going outside the world of what the Twilight Zone would normally have restricted itself
to. Yeah.
And that's a mistake. I mean, the Twilight Zone felt very much like filmed plays as well. And they were meant to be sort of like a little, they always had a message. There was always a social
social commentary to it, yeah.
But they were like little pieces of candy. They were short, like a great short story.
Yeah.
Short, simple, with a little twist at the end.
Yep.
And folks who made the most recent version of the Twilight Zone, they seem to want to do something more elaborate, more ambitious.
Yeah.
If that's the case, that's fine, but don't do the Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
Do something else.
Yeah, call it something different.
Right.
Call it Tales from the Crypt, or
I bet you, on the basis of the success of his movies, if Peele had gone and done his own anthology horror show, it would have been a great hit.
It would have been great, yeah.
And he wouldn't have had all these annoying people saying, "Oh, it's not as good as the Twilight Zone."
Yeah. Because I remember Tales from the Dark Side was a great show.
That was fun, yeah.
Lasted for a while. I mean, because they weren't trying to copy anything. It was just...
Right. There was a period there where there were a lot of those shows. Like there was a Tales from the Unexpected, Road Doll stories. A lot of those were very clever and well done. But I don't know. That's the other thing. I don't know if there's any market for that type of story anymore.
Yeah. Well, I guess the Creep Show is doing pretty good on Shudder.
That's true. Yeah, I haven't seen any yet, but
yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess what it comes down to ultimately is if you have a good story, then it's going to work.
It'll work. Yeah.
If you don't have a story that people are interested in, then you're going to be out of luck.
Then it's just all has to be visuals.
Right. And like I say, I think that's true of Hitchcock as well. When he had great source material, he had great movies.
Oh, yeah.
When he had material that wasn't right for him or it wasn't really very good stuff, then you had stuff that wasn't very good, stuff that wasn't memorable. And it seemed to take him a long time to realize that he should be doing this one type of thing.
Yeah.
But once that sunk in, he kept going and doing it. And that's where we got all the great movies from.
Oh, yeah. Well, I definitely recommend if anybody out there has only seen Psycho and The Birds, and what was the other big one that everybody always watches?
Well, Psycho and The Birds, and I know a lot of people for a long time thought North by Northwest was.
Yeah. But if that's the only thing you've seen, definitely go back and watch his older. I mean, that's the one thing that I'm glad I got out of this show was I went back and watched the old, and they're great.
Yeah.
They're great stories, great characters. All the actresses and actresses are great.
They're great, escapist fun, and they're beautiful filmmaking. A lot of
they're not short. He didn't make short films. I don't think I watched anything that was under an hour and 30.
Well, that's short enough, isn't it?
Yeah. For some reason, I was thinking, 1945. This is probably going to be a 35-minute movie.
Well, concision is an important part of making these things work. Yeah. Something like To Catch a Thief, that definitely felt long.
Yeah.
That it seemed to me long. It kind of got draggy, and I won't even go into Topaz and Torn Curtain.
Yeah, I think that was my problem though. I was like, do I have time to watch all these? Because then I would pull it up and it would say hour and 35, and I'd get into it and I'm like, it was over. I was like, wow, it was great. It didn't feel like I was there for
Yeah, when he was at his best, he made some very fast-moving, entertaining films. Because I suppose modern audiences might find these movies boring.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've heard some people online, some folks say that they think Psycho is boring. I don't know how they could feel that way.
I have no idea. Probably because it wasn't in color.
Maybe.
They probably like the updated version, which is the exact same thing.
People have all sorts of strange ideas. I mean, the first time I heard somebody say that they don't watch black and white movies, I thought, how could that be?
Yeah, why?
What would be I mean, they're making movies now, draining all the color, and they're color movies, but they're all blue or green.
Green, yeah.
But why would you have any sort of prejudice? If you're going to go off to see that, why? And you got your money ready, why would you be reluctant to watch a black and white?
I love black and white. I love the way that looks. I think it's great.
Well, they were actually made to be black and white movies. It wasn't just the absence of color. They shot them in a certain way so that they look great as black and white movies. So yeah, it definitely conjures up a certain feeling, a certain atmosphere. I mean, God knows the Universal horror movies. What would they have been at that great black and white photography?
Maybe I'll release this episode in black and white.
That's a thought. That would help your ratings, I'm sure.
Do a version of it, yeah. All right, so where can everybody find your black and white movies at?
Well, now I'm thinking I should go back. And
there you go, yeah.
That's the one thing I forgot. Demon Resurrection is available on Tubi TV. That's a supernatural thriller with zombies and cults and monster babies. and that's on Tubi TV, and it's on Amazon Prime and Sumo TV. And my first film, Sleepless Nights, which is actually coming up on I think it's actually reached its 23rd anniversary, 23 years since we started production on it, at least. I just recently re-edited it, and it's now in the hands of Film Hub. So I'm expecting that probably in the next month or two, it'll be popping up on some of the streaming platforms, probably Amazon first.
Right.
So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that they won't keep us waiting too long. But people can find me on Facebook under my name, William Hopkins, and they can find my films, Demon Resurrection, and also Sleepless Nights, which we're calling Sleepless Nights Revamped, since it's been remastered and re-edited. Those both have pages on Facebook and on Twitter. So if anybody's interested in keeping track of when Sleepless Nights Revamped finally comes out, so Facebook and Twitter are the best places to go for that information. And if you do a Google search under my name or under either one of the film's titles, you'll be able to find out all sorts of stuff about us. And what can we tell the audience about your exploits? So
well, you can find I'm on I'm on Twitter, 1313 Inc. And of course we got a Facebook page for the show. Of course I'm on Facebook under my name, and we have you can find the show on any of the streaming platforms, Google, iTunes, Spotify. Just Google it and you'll find it. And then of course we're on YouTube. I finally put up my first actual video that I edited together, put it up there for the Hellblazers episode, so you can go in there and watch that.
Yes.
And put some other smaller clips on there,
so we're all over the place.
All over the place. We're everywhere.
First step towards world domination.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, anyway, this will be another episode to add to the mix, I guess.
Yeah, I'll have to get it. Probably put another two days work into it just to get it up there, but it will be up at some point.
Now you know why I'm so far behind.
Yeah, I know. I think if I can get a faster computer, I think that'd help me out a little bit.
That would probably help.
It's the export time that's killing me.
I wonder if my computer that I do that sort of work on is about 15 years old. I wonder if modern computers really would export MPEG-4 files more quickly.
It probably would. I would say with more memory and a video card, probably help out.
I hope so. I hate to think that as I get into my senior years, I'm spending days exporting MPEG-4 files.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I would say faster computers would probably help out.
Well, if anybody in the sound of my voice wants to send me some money for a new computer, feel free. You know where to find me.
Yeah, just find him on Facebook.
That's right.
All right, well, this is a fun episode, and until next week, we'll continue to watch The Good, the Bad, and the Cheaply Made.